Testing, testing. 1 2 1 2. Test, test. Is this working? Are we live? Wait, shit. Okay, wait, hold on. I think PC's freaking out, monitor's freaking out, everything's breaking on me. Hold on, give me a second, please bear with me. Alright, monitor's back. Okay. No sound yet. Now there is? Are we live? Can you guys hear me? Alright, it's working? Okay, there we go. Thank goodness. I was stressing out for a moment there because for some reason my mic stopped being picked up by my PC. You mad at it's 7:30 AM? Apologies for the switch in a time zone, but I thought to make a stream for the EU bros because, well, that's when I usually do my gorillas. Joe K, thank you for being a Footstool for 1 month. 20 to 30 minutes of the chairman before work? Let's hope so, let's hope so. I am going to try my best to keep this stream short, mostly because I want to go back to working on finishing up the last few parts for the Brave stream, come Friday/Saturday, depending on your time zone. It's been rabbit hole after rabbit hole with that one. And I'm at the stage where now I have all of the tabs in my browser assembled. I just need to make sure everything fits into slides, which is going to be a challenge and a half, but it should work, it should all work out. Scarf Life is a real VTuber. Yes. Why the Fallout 76 Guerilla chair for the thumbnail? Not that I'm mad, I actually love it. It's not, well, I didn't really put too much thought into it. I have a folder that I just have on my PC labeled Gorilla Chairs, and I just found that on the internet while I was searching that up, so I grabbed it and shoved it in there. Mercurius, thank you for the gifted membership. Welcome to the new Footstool. Oh, Clan! Welcome to being a Footstool. Nice snipe, Mercurius. Sai, thank you for being a Footstool for 6 months. On my way to make another parallax measurement. Damn. 11:26 PM, I'm Queensland. Around the same kind of time here, where I am at the moment. What, a couple of weeks? Yeah, no, I saw that Niana announced that she was graduating. I think at the end, if I remember correctly, at the end of the month. It's going to be interesting to see where she goes from here, because, I mean, everyone said this, and everyone speculated this at this point, but it very much gave the impression that she was going corpo after this, so... You're doing 20 to 30 minutes? No, not quite, no. It wouldn't be... I was actually looking through my VODs the other day to just get a gauge of how long my average stream times are. And the funny thing is, the very first stream I did on this channel was almost 5 hours long. So we were sauna maxing before we even knew that we were sauna maxing. But apparently the shortest stream time that I have on this channel is 2.5 hours. So I don't think we need to. I don't think we'll only go for 20 to 30, unfortunately. Shadowgate, thank you for being a Footstool for 4 months. Sorry, I've got a little bit of a lisp. I have an ulcer or two somewhere in my mouth, and that's kind of affecting the way that I speak, which is a little annoying, but got a learner's permit test. Have a good stream. I hope your test goes well, Shadowgale. Hope your test goes well. A Random Games, thank you for being a Footstool for 2 months. I'm calling 10 plus hours for the Brave Group stream. It's going to be the first stream that I've done in a while that has more than 100 slides in it, by like a considerable margin by the time I'm done, so... Yeah. Also, another thing that I've realized just talking to myself for the past few days is that because right now in Australia we're kind of going through early winter and the temperatures dropped quite a bit. So because of the cold, I've kind of unconsciously tended towards clenching my jaws a little bit when I speak. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's been something that I've been between that and the mouth ulcers, I've been trying to sort of iron out the way that I sound when I speak. But it is not great. It is not exactly a recipe for easy streaming, let's say. I've got a cough, so I wasn't able to get sleep. Ah, I'm sorry to hear that, Mercurius. But I hope you get better soon. Charlie, thank you for the 5. Managing Cinder and her ideas, sorta sometimes. Of course. Classic, classic. Pretty cold here now? Yeah, no, Australia can get pretty chilly. Although I don't know if it's because we're too conditioned to the weather being hot. But yeah. Not quite, Azahara, not quite. No. I see what you did there, Alan. I see what you did there. She's not... Yeah, Niana's not leaving, she said so herself. Oh, yeah. I mean, Niana's already managed to really push the boundaries on what you can achieve as just an indie without even a manager helping you do things. Pulling off the degree of quality in the concerts that she's managed to achieve as just a lone actor, pretty much, is insane. Regardless of where she goes, she's going to be an absolute asset to them. But yeah, it doesn't really surprise me that she's chosen to go somewhere besides, well, I would assume somewhere besides indie based off of, you know, how the announcement was delivered. Oh, Rift Runners! Holy! Are you going to be talking about the... Welcome to the stream. Are you going to be talking about the Offkai ID? Oh, absolutely. Yes. That is something that we will be discussing. Because there are... How do I say this? There are quite a few gripes that I have with the way that the statement was given. More specifically with the information that was very conspicuously missing from that statement. And on top of that... Also, a little bit of deja vu that anyone who's kept up with the previous year's happenings at Offkai regarding the way that they do PR and my criticisms of it would probably get a sense of deja vu looking at their recent announcement regarding needing ID verification to go to your VTuber meet and greet. A Guerilla stream without telling us he hates us? Yeah. Drawbacks of not having a manager? Yes, indeed. By the way, I just want to check, is the audio level on my mic alright? Because since I added it as a new source, I just want to make sure that it's not like crunchy or anything. Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, Kyutsuyoi. Before we begin, I know you're planning on some stream idea on Friday, June 20th, but since the anniversary of FaZe's debut, maybe that can be your FaZe stream. Oh, bit short notice. The thing is with FaZe, it's one of those things where I don't have a topic ready to go. There are things that I'm keeping an eye on, but I'm not altogether sure that they're things that I'm quite ready to put into stream form. I mean, I could do a chill stream, for example, like a fanfiction stream based off of their lore, which I've done before, but I'm assuming that's not what you mean. Anyways, FU Chairman, I need to dip in and out because work. No problem. Oh, greetings, Jureen. It's very rare that I actually get to see you live, so this is a nice change. The fact that there's actually a chance she might end up in FaZe or Hollow is a testament to how good of an indie she was. Yeah, I agree. The idea I had was how FaZe manages to manage controversy and come out on top. See, the thing is with that, I mean, how do I say? I've talked about this before, but one of the reasons why I'm a bit hesitant to do a FaZe stream is because usually when I do a stream on a topic, it requires me to go beyond just looking at it as a fan. And the problem is with doing that, sometimes it takes a little bit of your immersion away. Sometimes permanently. And that's something that I've kind of been putting off when it comes to FaZe, a little bit. I will, in all likelihood, end up doing that eventually, but I'm not exactly keen on doing it. Billy, thank you for being a Footstool for 11 months. Bro, what the fuck? I'm studying for a test right now. I'm sorry for your loss, Billy. But I hope your test goes well. Does this stream cancel out tomorrow's? No. This is just a Guerilla that we're having because I felt like doing a little bit of yapping with you guys. I kind of missed pressing go live, so. Final exam was on Tuesday. Last of 9. Damn, you've really been pushing through a lot, Sai. I hope it goes well for you. Audio sounds fine? Alright, excellent. Oh, hi! Hello, Aquarake. Welcome to the stream. I consider myself the OG representative of VOD Gang. Oh no, absolutely. You're now permanently burned into my memory as the guy who ended up marrying the girl who he mentioned asking out in one of my VOD comments. So, bro is having stream withdrawals. Kind of, a little bit. It's either that or the cold, but I think stream withdrawals is less depressing of a thought. I just finished this semester's test and I passed on everything. Oh, that's a feel you love to see. You love to see it. Missed you too, Chairman. Aw, I appreciate it, guys. Oh no, Chairman's going parasocial. It always happens eventually. Not yet married, that's for next year. True, my bad. Engaged. I meant to say engaged. Hello, Chair. Hello, Ijin. Oh, yeah, speaking of, because your name is quite similar to his. If you guys remember from the stream that I did a few weeks back on SAG-AFTRA, well, not a few weeks at this point, like a month or more back. The stream that I did on SAG-AFTRA, if you were around for that, Mugen has recently released a 1 hour plus long video basically deep diving into the reason why SAG-AFTRA's video game VA strike has gone on for such an unholy amount of time. And it is a real eye-opener about how SAG-AFTRA in particular functions as a quote-unquote union. And the funniest thing is, apparently some of the, let's say, bad actors involved in dragging on the strike for as long as it has gone have been trying to mass report his video. So yeah, if that's something that tickles your fancy, or if that's a story you're interested in following up on, I highly recommend checking out his most recent video. Oh, hi Lumi, welcome to the stream. Welcome to the stream. Eventually might take years, even decades, but parasocialism will eventually take over. I mean, it's normal, right? You aren't, well, neither of us are really real people to the other, but it's still something that is very difficult not to get at all attached to. Hold on. Alright, I think everything's working correctly. It's 50 minutes? Oh, okay, never mind. My bad. I misremembered the runtime. But yeah. That is... Mugen has unironically shifted. He's pivoted from just being, like, you know, quote-unquote drama to unironically being... He's dipping his toes into proper investigative journalism. Which is quite impressive, to be honest. Considering how much of a black box SAG-AFTRA has attempted to become. Not to much success because of how incompetently it's managed, but the thought is still there. I watched that Mugen video and holy smokes, that situation is ridiculous. The union grift is actually real. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I do want to emphasize that SAG-AFTRA is, as far as unions around the world go, it is somewhat of an aberration when you look at unions internationally, but it really, really stretches the degree to which it really stretches the definition of what a union is. I'll just say. I'm not real, no, don't take your meds, I want to disappear. I'm sorry, Aquarek. Eventually we're going to have to get to that point. Altia, hello, welcome to the stream. I knew I always had a bad feeling whenever I looked at SAG, even tried pointing out how they force people to join, but I didn't know specifics. Oh yeah, no, I mean, for a while there have been little signs sprinkled here and there in the way that they operate and the way that they communicate that they're probably operating. I've seen this metaphor used a lot of times at this point, a lot of times by Ban Min actually, but they've been operating more like a mafia than like a proper union. But what Muujin is talking about is it provides a nice little data point that you can now very easily point to in order to show the way that they operate. My most trustworthy source of news is Asmon called I Wish I Was Kidding. I mean, welcome to being on the internet in modern day. I have more people that get their news from Twitter, Reddit, or YouTube than they do from literally any news outlet across the world. And this is just the norm nowadays. It's part of the reason why these news outlets, regardless of whether they're, little ones that operate in the scope of just, a little town, or if they're, government subsidized, like for example the ABC in Australia, they're all panicking because they don't know how to stay relevant when everyone's moving online, younger generations don't give a shit about them anymore, etc, etc, etc. They haven't cracked the code though, and honestly, having worked with one of them, I don't know if they ever will. They really have destroyed their credibility. Yeah, in a nutshell, that about sums it up. SAG-AFTRA is not a union, in my opinion. Unions with the right people can do better than what they're doing. Oh yeah, no. Like I said, SAG-AFTRA is really straining the limits of what you can say a union is. SAG operating international is about as competent and aware as a random local coffee shop attempting to do it off the cuff. Funny you should bring up coffee shops, because I don't know if you guys have seen this, but on Twitter there have been 2 coffee stores. I believe that they were started by the same person, one by the name of Oshi Cafe, where they have attempted to start some sort of VTuber related coffee business. But the funniest thing is, they were making tweets about it, throwing shade at gamer subs for being partnered with oh so problematic creators, and they haven't sold a single bag or cup of coffee to my knowledge. They didn't even know that Face Connect was a coffee company, funnily enough, which speaks to the amount of market research they did before bumbling onto the scene, but yeah. Unfortunately, SAG-AFTRA and the way that it operates internationally is very emblematic of the way that people stereotype, like, American tourists, which is quite depressing to think about, but yeah. How would that work? Yeah, Oshi Cafe was a disaster, yeah. So many businessmen trying to do the business thing in the industry now. I believe in this case it was a businesswoman, not that she fared very well, although again that was mostly tied back to a lack of market research and the like, or any research to be honest. Not selling their last cup of coffee. Lack of awareness of Face Coffee is the cherry on top. Yeah, I mean, look, trying to start a VTuber coffee business without knowing that FaZe Connect sells coffee is like trying to get into fast food while having no idea of what KFC or a McDonald's is. Good night, guys. Have a fun stream. I hope you have a good rest, Alan. I hope you have a good rest. I'm gonna put you on the background. I'm gonna go to sleep. I hope this proves to be good enough background noise to fall asleep to. Only way they could sell coffee is they go the Jacksepticeye route and sell the beans. True, true. Although, from what I could see at least of the quote-unquote business before all of their socials were blasted off the face of the earth, was that it seemed more like a drop shipping business than an actual like coffee sales business. But yeah. If you're in Remocord and Rat Stump, basically... Oh, no, I saw the recent... I feel like that's a bit of a... I feel like that was a bit of a nothing burger, because I don't know if any of the talents involved in that situation were actually hot and bothered. I think it was just the fans reading too deep into things. To be fair, KFC and McDonald's branding is primarily fast food, though I'm not quite sure which company would be a better example. I'd say that McDonald's, possibly, because they have a wider range of quote-unquote fast food than KFC. They're known for things like burgers, fries, drinks, Happy Meals, whatever, whereas KFC is mostly just chicken. Maybe, like, a waffle, but mostly chicken. Hello, Sparky, welcome to the stream. Rare EU-friendly chair. Yeah, I do try to squeeze in the occasional EU-friendly stream time for you guys, even if it is a little late for me. There's also that. Oh yeah, I only just saw that earlier today, so I don't know enough about it to comment on it. KFC is waffles? I'm pretty sure they do. I remember, what was the name of that YouTube channel? Review of the Week. I remember seeing him review a KFC meal that contained, I think it was a waffle. I'm not sure though. It was fried chicken and some kind of pastry. But yeah, I swear it was a waffle. Yeah, chicken and waffle promo. Yeah, that was probably it. What I meant is that FaZe is mostly known as an idol company, and the coffee pot is a bit overshadowed by it. I don't know. I feel like the more entrenched you get into actually, you know, watching FaZe, the more the coffee part of it becomes more prominent than the idol part. Occasionally. It just keeps coming back to that. I mean, that's their iconic merch, right? Biscuit? I don't think it was a biscuit. I'm pretty sure it was a waffle. I'm pretty sure. Review bruh my Oshi. Good taste. Waffles might be a regional limited item. Oh yeah, for sure it was a limited item. But I remember them selling it at some point. Oh hello, didn't expect to see you live at this hour. Welcome to the stream, Blaze. Welcome to the stream. Yeah, no. Rare Guerilla stream. Vivian, welcome to the stream. The FaZe Girls literally just have a Minecraft stream where they're mining coffee. Yeah, they did. Had a whole event about it. Coffee is 35% of their revenue. Okay, I didn't know the actual stats, but now that you put the number out there, damn. They really are a coffee company. Are we reviewing Oshis? Not quite. And speaking of, hold on. The Haze Coffee review? Actually, if you are interested in someone who's doing in-depth reviews of FaZe Connect Coffee, or someone who has done that in the past, I highly recommend checking out Lord Morlington's channel, because he's been doing videos where he actually takes the coffee flavors from each of the FaZe talents and review different ways of brewing it to see which way yields the best flavor, etc. So if you're actually interested in a real review of FaZe Coffee, I highly recommend going to check out Lord Morlington's channel. Merch makes all the money after all. That's true. Right, hold on. Let me switch over to the slides, because I think I've yapped on for long enough. Morlington, my oofy. Yes. Oh, welcome to the stream, Hype Shudder. Erina, oh my god. Understandable reaction to seeing Erina. Just to clarify, Chairman, I think this is from Lewd, or one of those closed FaZe affiliates, sharing some charts from the investor meeting. Oh, okay. I haven't seen those. Was about to say that you might want to do a review alongside FaZe Morlington and FaZe Coffee. I'm not in the habit of drinking coffee. I probably don't have a developed enough. Okay, hold on. I think okay, hold on. Let me copy paste the audio input over. This is such a... Okay, hold on. Give me a second. Apologies for the scuff. I'm going to have to copy paste audio. Alright. Is this working? Let me just check that all the... Okay, the filters are still there. Alright, is this working now? Is this working now? We back? Alright, excellent. Alright. Turns out I can actually stream. Alright, remind me, where did I cut off again? Because I forgot. There we go, Lamau. It's on now. Mistake only a tea drinker would make. Look, I won't stand for this tea drinker slander. My flaws are my own, and my own only. Alright, we back? We back? Excellent. Alright. Look at the bright side. This just means one less thing to be scuffed tomorrow. True, true. Better for me to get all of the scuff out now before I actually have to have a stream that, you know, will probably go on for quite some time. Oh yeah, I was talking about underdeveloped taste buds. Yeah, so I was mentioning how I don't drink. I'm not in the habit of drinking coffee. So I probably wouldn't be in a position where I could evaluate the taste of coffee with any sort of novelty or originality or even accuracy. So yeah, I would much rather leave it to Mollington. But I was also saying that yeah, I started getting Mollington's documentaries on FaZe recommended to me about 8 months after the first round of FaZe clips started popping up on my YouTube homepage. So yeah, that's quite an experience. So I can very much relate to other people who started really getting into FaZe via Mollington's documentaries. They're old, but they're gold. Not much of a coffee drinker, yeah. FaZe needs tea line for Cleo. I do wonder if they would ever expand to other beverages. But I do think that the coffee thing is like a nice little autistic niche that Sakuna has established for himself. I hate coffee, so that would be my idea of hell. Fair enough, fair enough. You can drink coffee without the milk, bit bitter but still good. Yeah. I'm more of a sour man myself, not a big fan of bitter flavors, but perhaps someday I will be bored enough to see what it's like. Old but gold, just like the hags of FaZe. Amen, brother, amen. I forgot, start from the beginning. Of course. Morning, Super Knight, morning. Plus the coffee memes? True. Hello, Southside Slider, welcome to the stream. Alright, so again, this is not going to be, obviously, since this is Guerilla stream, right? This is not going to be the same standard of the kind of, you know, informational dissections or deep dives that I usually try to do on this channel. This is mostly because I just wanted to, you know, hit go live and yap a little bit with you guys. But as per usual, since I am going to be critiquing a few things, critical of a few things and or parties and or entities, same sort of disclaimers as I would usually have over the course of a normal stream. First, do not attempt to harass and or contact any of the people or entities mentioned during the stream in any way, shape or form. If I am given any sort of, if I'm informed that someone from the stream has done that or engaged in this kind of behavior, I will be banning them, no questions asked. Second, all text, videos, and images shown during the stream are included for the purposes of critique and or commentary and are thus protected under fair use. I have tried to sort of extract information from, because we're going to be talking about the idol graduations. I've tried to, you know, do my usual thing of taking out specifically timestamp statements and then transcribing them for the sake of maintaining a little bit of distance between what I'm talking about and the actual stream itself. But there will be other instances where I will mention things that are well, I mean, if I don't show them on screen, that's why. Third, all information / material shown over the course of this stream was posted and or addressed by the subjects of the stream on a public platform and or remains publicly available / traceable. Dates may be affected by time zones, and I'll be narrating everything on stream, so there's that. It's a Guerilla stream, so it'll be a short 5.5 hours. You know, I was looking through my old Guerilla streams, and unironically, I'm pretty sure the average duration is 5 hours. I'm gonna try to cap this out at like 2 hours max. We'll see how well I actually I do when it comes to trying to meet that goal. But yeah. Oh, your Sheena Crab hoodie arrived? That's excellent news, Simonite. I'm glad to hear that. Wait, your Mari Ian has coffee too? Of course, she's a phase talent. Apropos of Little, have you ever seen the Kids of Hell comedy sketch on the addiction? It's quite amusing. I haven't. I'll make a note down to check that out at some point over the next few weeks. It's sauna time. 2 hours? Okay, so for... Look, I've been trying to do a better job of actually capping the streams at the length that I say that they're going to go. But we'll see. Alright, so... For those who aren't familiar with what's been going on with Idol, basically, on June 9th, so this is around 3 days ago now, Idol's official Twitter account put out the following announcement. Quote, notice of graduation of Koni Confetti, Kai Saikota, and Nikki Ray. Dear Idol community, thank you for your continued support of Idol Corporation. With deep gratitude and a heavy heart, we announce that Koni Confetti, Kai Saikota, and Nikki Ray will be graduating from Idol Corp as we prepare to enter a new chapter in the company. Each of them has brought something unique to Idol, shaping our community with their passion, creativity, and the unforgettable memories they helped create. We are thankful for everything they've shared with us over the years. As part of their send-off, graduating talents have been invited to perform at a special concert during Offkai Expo Gen 4. We invite fans to celebrate their journeys with us and welcome fan letters or small gifts at our booth, which will be delivered to the talents after the event. Farewell streams will conclude by June 30th, with Nikki continuing on with individual activities afterward. We kindly ask for your understanding and patience during this time and for your continued support of the remaining talents as we move forward together. Thank you, Koni, Kai, and Nikki. You will always be part of Idol's story. Let's make this final month unforgettable. And as a lot of people in chat are pointing out, this, for quite a few people, seem to be a little bit of an unexpected blow to Idol, because this is a pretty major blow. 3 talents leaving at once is a pretty major hit to your talent roster. All the more since one of them, well, while not too unexpected, it was quite tragic to have, one of the members of your original founding generation, the last remnant of your original founding generation, leave as well. However, to go through some of the more specific parts of the talent statements. How do I say this? Few bits of information that I don't... How do I say... This is a little hard to figure out because I'm kind of figuring out how I want to word this on the fly, but... While there are certain bits of information that have been given in the talents talking about the situation that, for me, raises a little bit of an eyebrow, the more interesting thing to me, especially in light of the digging I've been doing on how Brave Group has operated in the past, is how a lot of the EN audience has reacted to this news and reacted to specific bits of information. Case in point. So when this announcement went live on Idol's Twitter, this was at a time where Kai had a waiting room on her channel for about if I remember correctly, about a day beforehand that was simply titled at the time, Announcement. Now, obviously, when this notice came out, when this statement came out from Idol, everyone realized it was a graduation notice. I think there were some people in the replies to this tweet also saying how, she had a waiting room up. How come you just posted this without letting her like speak first? But I would wager that that was probably because, well, at least in part, possibly because they saw how the VNU things went, and perhaps they just thought it was better to just hit everyone with the news right off the bat and then have the talent speak out afterwards. However, the stream itself, there were 3 bits of information that pertained directly to the graduation that were quite noteworthy, at least in my opinion. So, at around 1 minute 13 seconds, Kai states that she was willing to give Idol another go after its acquisition, but that she has since decided to graduate for reasons that she will not be sharing. To quote her, at around 1 minute 31 seconds, she states, quote, "It was not a specific instance, but rather a culmination of things that led to this decision." Now, this is one of those parts of the statement where, again, personally, if you've been keeping track of what's been going on with Idol, specifically the fact that at some point during April, they had a bit of a spat with Lani, who migrated over from when Idol was acquired in the first place as one of the lead talent managers at the organization, where she alleged that Brave Group's executives were fabricating or planning on fabricating an NDA breach in order to justify a termination of her. And so, if you've been keeping up with that kind of news, this is a statement that seems kind of, I mean, it could point to a number of things, right? However, like I said before, the reactions from some members of the Ian audience to this statement, or this sentiment, I should say, this idea that the decision to graduate was not down to one thing, but rather a culmination of a bunch of different things, none of which are really specified, is quite interesting. And again, that'll make more sense later on in the stream. And then, about 6 seconds later, she states that she was not offered the chance to buy her IP, hence the complete graduation. Now, from what I understand, Kai was fairly close with Lani too. I wouldn't know about that. However, this was the bit that a lot of people kind of, sort of, from what I could see at least, a lot of people found surprising. And yeah, okay, so yeah, Blaze. It's weird that they wouldn't be offered to keep their IPs this time around. I can understand with Hollow and the rest of the lore of the characters intertwined, but there's a precedent, so why? Here's the thing, right? And this is where my view on the situation might diverge quite a bit from other people who've been looking at this. Because to me, it doesn't really surprise me that Brave, even after offering to sell them the IPs upon when Idol was first acquired, is no longer extending the same offer to some of the talents now. And the reason is because if you think about this from the perspective of a member of the audience, or from, the perspective of a talent, it doesn't make any sense. But if you're thinking about this from the perspective of a corporation looking to try and preserve as much of the value of a company you have acquired as possible, you can start to see how the incentives behind allowing a talent to leave with their IP even after the acquisition has completely gone through might not be a good idea. Because if you think about it in terms of the precedent that Brave Group would be setting by allowing Kai to buy her IP now, what they would essentially be signaling is that there is no longer any cost to wanting to leave the company. I do think that there was a window when Brave first acquired Idol where it would have been more of a net PR loss for them to refuse to sell the talents their IPs even if they were leaving. But that window has now elapsed, so they are now in the stage where they are no longer focused on retaining the remaining goodwill or whatever from Idol's audience that transferred over to Brave once they acquired the company, but they are now more focused on securing the main asset that they have in their hands, which is the IP. And this is something that will make more sense in the stream that I end up doing the stream that I end up doing tomorrow. But one of the most crucial perspective shifts that I think audiences are going to need to adopt in order to start to understand the way that Brave Group works as a company is to understand that their primary good product, right, is not actually the talents, and it's not the talents' experience at the company either. It's not even the audience's experience of the talents when they press go live. It's the IPs. The IPs that they purchased along with Idol when they acquired the company. Like I said, a few seconds ago, the cost of hanging on to the IPs when they first acquired Idol was pretty high. Because obviously if a talent wants to leave and the company, just got acquired, the audience probably would hold it against Brave if they didn't give the talents the chance to simply opt out of the acquisition by buying out their IP. But again, now that window has closed. So now Brave is probably more focused on locking down the IPs that transferred over to them. Now, I'm not saying this is the way that it goes for all of the Idol talents. As we will see in a few minutes, not all of the Idol talents have the exact same agreement with Brave or with Idol from what we can tell. But this is most likely going to be the case for a lot of them who are still at the company. No way, is that an unscheduled stream? Welcome to the stream, Marco. Yeah. So, how do I say this? To me, the fact that a lot of people were as surprised at this piece of information as they were tells me that, at least in the West, Brave Group is not very well understood. Because the more you... And this is... I will ask for you to bear with me while I indulge a little bit in a tiny bit of, shall we say, previewing, foreshadowing for the stream later on this week. The more you understand about the way that Brave Group has operated in the past, the less surprising this specific bit of information becomes. Because like I said before, one of the more important perspective shifts that people need to adopt in order to understand Brave Group's strategy as a company is to understand that their focus is not on talents or VTubers, it's on IPs. Now, the rest of this was mostly just a personal message to her fans, expressing how grateful she was for the opportunity to be a part of Idol, how she regrets nothing, and how she's never going to forget them, etc, etc. But moving on to the other talents and what they said about their graduations. So, of the 3 talents who were graduating, the only one who didn't actually have like a stream on their channel dedicated to talking about it was Coney. And she responded to the initial notice that was posted by Idol by saying, quote, "I had many dreams and ideas that will never come to fruition. I was beaten down from trying and trying even when I knew it was over, but for all along, I'm glad I was able to meet some lifelong friends through this long and tiring journey. I hope I made you laugh at least once. I keep going because of my lovely friends who I will love endlessly forever and ever." Now, anyone who's been keeping up with Coney's PL account will probably be able to see why she's graduating, because it's popping off way harder than Coney Confetti is or has been for a while. But she also stated in the follow-up tweet, "I can't do an announcement stream or grad stream because I'm locked out of my stuff right now." But this wasn't anything to do with, like, a management, like, kerfuffle or whatever. She made it quite clear it was just because she forgot the password. So, it was just a bit of a, an absent-minded moment. One thing I do want to point out, to all of the people who watch my streams, or who are watching this stream, please don't do things like this, because it comes across really invasive and tone deaf when you go into another creator's space and you tag like a drama tuber to go in there. It just comes off very invasive. So, yeah, if you're watching this, if you watch my content regularly, please avoid doing something like that. It's a very easy way of getting muted by the creator that you're tagging if you end up, spamming that too much as well. So, yeah, please refrain from this kind of behavior. But so many rats were spawned from the initial tweet? Yeah, no, absolutely. I can understand why some people would look at this and go like, oh, no. Because, granted, with what happened earlier on with the Globy girls, in January, February of this year, probably not, probably kind of a loaded statement. However, in this particular case, we have no reason to believe that that's what's going on here. Hold on. I forgot the password. Yeah. Billy, thank you for the 5. Instructions unclear. Got my foot stuck in a fan. Of course. You always see the tags too? Yeah, footstools and backseaters are bound by the disclaimer's contract. Yeah. Exactly. Connie's literally too busy making bank to bother streaming. Most Connie's already migrated or left. Yeah. So again, anyone who's kept up with what's going on in her PL, you already know why she's graduating. You probably saw this coming from a mile away. But the third member whose graduation announcement was made and who ended up going live with a stream addressing some of the questions that her fan base might have about the graduation was Nikki Ray, the last remnant of Idol's first generation back when they had a Hebrew branch. And she did this stream 2 days ago on June 10th, where she basically just answered a few questions from her chat about the circumstances surrounding the graduation as well as what's going to happen afterwards. Now, 2 bits of information that I thought were of note. At 31 minutes 4 seconds, she states that she will be keeping her model and channel, and she anticipates the fact that other people might be confused as to why she gets to do it, whereas Kai said that, they weren't selling the IPs to her at least, and presumably the implication is to Coney either. Nikki states that the reason why she's keeping her model and channel is due to having a different situation from the other talents by virtue of being a founding member of Idol. I can imagine that because she was a founding member, she probably had some sort of different arrangement with AVL at the time, which probably ended up surviving over the course of the contract negotiations when Brave acquired Idol as well. So again, this is, this might raise a few eyebrows, but overall I think this is quite understandable, sorry. She came in with that IP, didn't she? I wouldn't know. But again, I would assume that, based off of what she said, it is something to do with the fact that she was a founding member. And as a result, probably had a special degree of involvement in actually getting Idol off the ground that was acknowledged in the form of giving her control over the IP should she ever choose to depart from the company with it. At 1 hour, 15 minutes and 30 seconds, she also clarifies that she wasn't quote-unquote motivated to leave, so I believe that someone in chat asked her the question, what motivated you to leave? And she answered it by saying that she wasn't motivated to leave so much as simply making the decision to do so because she had observed the future direction of the company, and while Brave had a lot of exciting things planned for Idol, she felt that she wouldn't fit into it very comfortably from a personal standpoint, and decided that it would be better for her to leave. Now, I got confused. I thought she was one of the girls that Idol ES. Okay, that makes sense. So, for those who watched who were around when I was talking about the VNU graduations, this sounds very reminiscent of the kind of, the customary, oh, the company's moving in a new direction. I'm very excited for it, but I just don't see a place for myself there, right? And I'm not saying that's the same thing, but in general, I don't think it is a good idea to, to interpret statements like this in either a overly positive or an overly negative direction, right? This is a pretty neutral statement, very on par with I am leaving because of a difference with management. It is basically designed to be a corporate, a sanitized corporate stock phrase to explain why you are departing from a company at the time that you are, right? So, thing is though, again, all in all, these are graduations that don't really have that much information that would raise an eyebrow. I mean, sure, maybe the news that, you know, Brave Group is no longer selling the IPs to the towns who want to leave, maybe that's something that a few people might, you know, take issue with. But aside from that, everything else is very, very tame and standard, especially considering some of the other, you know, quote-unquote graduations that we've seen from Brave Group over the past few months. But the really interesting thing to me was seeing how a lot of the reactions to the news of these 3 graduations from members of the EN audience can kind of be summed up in these 2 tweets. One, which is by Trigger Point, saying, "The hell happened to Idol?" And the other by The Dark Enjoyer, saying, "Me going back in time to save the girls by stopping Brave from acquiring Idol." And the 2 things about this response, the 2 things about these, you know, these 2 different categories of responses that kind of, how do I say, it kind of bemuses me a little bit, is that the responses tend to range between not seeing this coming at all to, or at least the, you know, the common, you know, common responses in quotation marks, right? Obviously, anyone who's, you know, it'll depend from talent to talent. I'd wager that the news that Nikki and Kai were graduating is probably a little more surprising than the news that Coney is graduating, for example. But in general, a lot of people seem to be defaulting to the idea that these 3 talents leaving at once is something that could never have been anticipated. And something that bemuses me equally as much is seeing people make this claim, meme as it is, that, oh, if only Brave Group never acquired Idol, right? Then Idol would have been saved. And again, I think that these 2 responses are very emblematic of how disconnected the EN side of VTubing is from the way that Brave Group has historically operated as a company. Because, or even in the latter case, kind of disconnect from the way that Idol has been running as a company. Because if you were paying attention to the way that Idol was operating, especially towards the end of last year, you don't even have to be like a fan of a specific talent from Idol. You would know that if Brave Group didn't acquire Idol, it would have imploded by now already. It probably would have imploded by the end of 2024 and joined the pile of corpo corpses that littered the entire year. Because Idol was not being run very competently at all by AVL. And we have plenty of accounts, some anecdotal, others not as much, that, again, it probably would have collapsed without Brave Group's intervention. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certainly reasons to be, shall we say, concerned about the way that Brave Group handles the companies that it acquires. But I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this. I'm not quite sure that the EN audience, for the most part, has grasped what those are, besides just, oh, 3 VTubers are graduating from this company at once. Which is an understandable reason to sort of, you know, raise your eyebrows and go, okay, something's going on. But I don't think it quite encompasses the, how do I say, the way that what's going on with Idol seems very reminiscent of things that have happened with Brave Group's acquired companies before. And yeah, the impression, so yeah, the other thing I was going to say is that As per what Trigger Point said here, like, you know, the hell happened to Idol. Again, it's kind of emblematic of that same, I suppose, it feels like, it feels like, how do I say, 3 talents leaving Idol probably would have happened with or without Brave Group's intervention. But the thing that kind of, I suppose, that this tells me is that, how do I say, this makes me sound like a pedant, but although I am of the belief that given the way that Idol was run, at this point in 2025, regardless of whether Brave Group acquired Idol or not, we were going to be seeing some form of group exodus from the company. But the reasons behind why that exodus happens differ depending on whether Brave Group did or didn't acquire it. And what I mean by that is, yes, you will still get talents leaving the company after it's been acquired by Brave Group. But, again, it will be for reasons that might be a little different than if they simply left while it was still under AVL's management. Brave Group seems like a problem magnet for some reason, or at least on the EN side of it. See, the thing is, there is a reason for that. And again, this will make more sense in light of, you know, during the stream that I end up doing later on this week. But, little bit of a preview. When you look at the history of Brave Group's acquisitions, right, the different companies that it has acquired, and this requires you to look at both the EN side of things and the JP side of things, you very quickly start to notice that when Brave Group acquires a company, it usually goes one of 2 ways. Either the company that it acquires becomes a VSPO, and these are usually the cases with companies that were probably already going to be standalone successes even prior to Brave Group's intervention, or it can go very, very differently. And again, I'll get into what very, very differently is on the day of the stream. But again, just know that when Brave Group acquires a company, it is not as straightforward as just it is saved or it is doomed. It very much depends on a few key factors, some of which depend on, you know, how the company existed prior to Brave Group's acquisition of it. I mean, Harry's up there. Yeah. AVL is probably the greatest Judas of the VTubing. Okay, I'll be honest. How do I say this? I can understand if people looked at the way that AVL ran Idol and the way that he would make posts. I would assume that the posts that Idol was making, on the company statements that they were making, how they're committed to transparency. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that he was the brains behind that. He was the brains behind that. I can understand if a lot of people in this industry, especially around, late 2023, early 2024, would look at a company talking about the importance of transparency, yada, 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 and kind of eating it up a little bit, right? Because at that stage in the industry, yeah, it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that, oh, okay, more transparency probably means good company, right? But in retrospect, after looking at the various companies that have collapsed over the course of 2024 and how many of them touted transparency for easy PR points, it is very easy in retrospect to look at the way that Idol marketed itself and understand how they got to the point where they needed to be acquired by a bigger company in order to survive. They are gotcha. Okay, Rue, you say that as a joke, but unironically, one of the things that will never cease to tickle me in hindsight is how people looked at Brave Group around the time when all of the anti-Niji Sanji sentiment was like at its peak, and they assumed that Brave Group was somehow like the better version of Any Color. And a lot of people, like, one of the reasons why everyone was so mad at Niji was because they had a strategy of shotgunning out talents and essentially playing gacha with them, right? This was the same approach that Nexus tried to go with when Harry started it, playing gacha with individual talents. But when you look at the way that Brave Group operates, they do the same thing, but just scaled up. Instead of playing gacha with individual talents, they are playing gacha with entire companies. They are buying up companies, crossing their fingers they turn out to be a VSPO, and then going from there. Again, this is just me, like, you know, ranting a little bit, kind of, you know, this is all based off of the stuff that I've been, you know, looking at for the past week or so. But again, it'll make a lot more sense. It'll make a lot more sense later on this week when I do the Brave Group stream. But yeah, no, Brave Group absolutely has a strategy when it comes to how they seek to expand their reach, develop their public image, etc., etc., etc. They have an end goal in mind. But the thing is, and this is the thing that I'm not too sure that Ian audiences understand yet, is that their vision for VTubing is a lot more similar to that of Harry from Nexus or Riku Tazumi than it is to, say, I don't know, Gunrun or Sakana or Yagu. It is very, very different to how a lot of people seem to be thinking it was at the beginning of 2024. Brave Group is trying to be gacha whaler. I think that's a pretty accurate way of describing it. Also, the positivity was generated by V4 Mirai. Speaking for myself, I didn't know Brave. Okay, so yeah, this is another thing, right? So, companies like Globy and V4 Mirai are essentially organically grown Brave Group agencies. They are agencies that Brave Group didn't acquire but started themselves. And to their credit, Brave Group has built a success... Well, okay, how do I say this? I want to be very careful about how I word this. The thing about V4 Mirai and Globy is that they have been net positives for Brave Group by generating a stable source of goodwill and positive PR for the company over the course of their existence, pretty much. V4 Mirai gained it became known as like the 3D model / concert company because of how quickly each of their talents would receive, you know, a 3D model plus a virtual concert after debuting, right? That was their like shtick for a while, at least. However, the thing about V4 Mirai and Globy, and this is the thing that I always found to be quite... Suspicious is not the right word, but something that always kind of... How do I say this? Brought up more than a few questions when I was looking at Brave Group's degree of investment in them is how do they fund it? Because it looks like a lot of money goes into V4 Mirai and Globy. And while you can certainly make the argument that they are successful agencies, I don't think it's as easy to make the argument that they are profitable agencies. And again, when you are evaluating a company, you cannot attribute to it human motivations. When you look at a company, the way that it behaves, you have to judge it based off of incentives, not based off of things like, you know, not the same motivations that you would usually take into account when you are trying to assess the actions of a person. And obviously, when you're evaluating the actions and strategy of a company, you look at what makes money. And the thing about Globy and V4 Mirai is they don't make money, they don't make as much money as seems to have been invested in them. And that is the thing that kind of, as someone who's been keeping track, or who has been trying to keep track of the way that these corpos develop, one thing that you start to realize very quickly is the ball always has to drop at some point. If you have a company that is receiving a lot of investment but can't seem to go into the black or the green, at some point that investment is going to dry up, and then all of a sudden it's going to look like everything collapsed at once. That was what happened with Pixelink. Pixelink seemed fine until December of last year, and then everything seemed to come crashing down at once. Because a company that isn't profitable isn't guaranteed... Well, a company that isn't profitable exists at the whims of wherever the funding is coming from. And that's the thing about V4 Mirai and Globy, and a lot of Brave Group's smaller agencies, basically all of them except for Vispo and Riot Music perhaps, is where one of the questions that I had going into making the Brave stream is, where does the money come from? Because it's not coming from the audience, it's coming from somewhere else. And I mean, the obvious answer was, it's coming from investors. And again, like I said earlier, when you start coming to the conclusion, when you start realizing that the main... Okay, hold on, let me rewind a bit. One of the things that I have tried to emphasize, starting from around January of this year, where we did an entire month worth of streams looking at how corpos collapsed and what went wrong, is when you are assessing a corporation's obligations and responsibilities, you have to follow the money. A corporation taking revenue from its talents is not just a cost that they impose onto their talents for no reason. It is a measure of obligation that the corporation has to its talents, and by extension, to their viewers. The thing about Brave Group that I think a lot of people don't seem to realize, which is what makes their business decisions seem quite confusing. Brave Group's main source of revenue, as of right now, for the majority of the companies that it owns, does not seem to come from the viewers. And that has a number of implications for the kind of decisions that it makes, the way that it treats its talents, its, the way that it messages, communicates with its audience, that, again, I think a lot of people in the EN audience haven't quite become familiar with, or haven't had a chance to become familiar with. So, one of the things that I do hope that... One of the things that I hope becomes a lot clearer after I end up doing the stream on Saturday or Friday, depending on your time zone, is because the majority of Brave Group's revenue or funding doesn't seem to come from the viewers of the VTubers that it has under its wing, you're going to have to adjust the expectations you have of the decisions that Brave Group as a company is going to make. Because a company is always going to be motivated to cater to wherever its funding comes from. And if the funding doesn't come from the viewers, then the question becomes, what function do the viewers serve in the overarching operations of the business? Because, again, if you are not, if you are not the main reason why a company exists, because you're not the main form of revenue or funding that they have, then as a result, the company is also going to start making decisions that perhaps aren't catered towards you or the people who, are connected with you as the talents are, right? But yeah, that's pretty much very brief, like not at all detailed overview of some of the information to come out. But again, this was more an outlet for me to sort of rant a little bit with you guys about how, again, I don't know how to say it besides, over the past year, it has become very obvious that people in the EN side of the VTubing audience, and I don't exclude myself from this category either, especially early on in 2024, probably didn't look at Brave Group with as much, shall I say, cynicism as the company's actions and prior history probably warranted. And now it's starting to catch up a little bit. We're starting to see signs of that leaking through with Idol. But I'm hoping that, again, with the information that I'm going to try to give you guys, summarize to you guys on in the next stream, it becomes a lot easier to see why Brave Group probably shouldn't be built up to be the sort of messiah of Corpo VTubing. But yeah. Don't expect them to act in your interests. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Is Brave a unicorn company made to get money from stocks? See, after looking at the way that it operates, I do have a sneaking suspicion that that may be closer to its actual monetization model than, you know, grow your VTubers and hope that they don't burn out, right? Because that's, you know, that's the model that most agencies in this sphere, well, most successful agencies in this sphere have, right? Go all in on your VTubers and their audience. Because, well, again, this is how HoloLive and FaZe Connect are doing things, right? Where, well, HoloFaZe and VShojo are doing things where you invest in your VTubers, you make sure that your talents are as, well, maybe not immune to burnout, but certainly minimize the effects of burnout, or do your best to do that, and then eventually help your talents cultivate an audience that you can then monetize by, you know, giving your talent merchandise, putting out, you know, unique events, con appearances, whatever, right? But again, the final product is your VTubers, your talents. That's the thing that you get most of your money from, because your their viewers' connection to the, you know, the viewers' connection to the VTuber is the thing that ultimately ends up creating your source of revenue. But with Brave, it's not like that at all. Where, or I shouldn't say not at all, but it doesn't seem to primarily revolve around that. That seems to be secondary to the larger source of revenue, which is grabbing investments from other venture capital, like companies, etc. That's the thing that makes me, shall I say, that's the thing that makes me apprehensive towards the way that Brave Group operates. Brave Group is not the messiah, they're just naughty boys. You know, again, you say that as a joke, but if you look through some of their prior history, and I don't just mean on the EN side, I mean on the JP side, there is quite a bit of evidence to suggest that something's going on there that is not as simple as just managerial oopsie. Welcome back to bye. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's how Silicon Valley works? Yeah. I hesitate to say how much of Brave Group is probably buoyed by hot air, but one of the most, how do I say this? One of the most sobering things that you start to realize when you look at the way that these companies operate, and when you start trying to understand how they are driven by incentives to make the decisions that they do, is how little actual talent matters when your only objective in this space is to make money. One thing that I want to make sure that you guys, one thing I want to make sure to emphasize is when I say that a company under Brave is not profitable, I don't mean that as a slight against any of the talents, because that cannot and should not be interpreted as an assessment of how talented the people in those companies are, because that has absolutely no relation to what I'm talking about. The problem is when you're looking at the industry from the perspective of, you know, all of these actors coming in to make money, right? It is very depressing how little actual talent correlates with profitability. And as a result, how little actual talent serves to move the needle for a company that is, by its very nature, only sustained by its ability to make money. To be honest, I think a lot of Ian fans forget VTuber corpos are businesses and need to make money. Yeah, I do think that, especially on the Ian side, people do have too much of an aspirational or idealized view of how VTubing, quote-unquote, should work, and people don't pay enough attention to things like incentives, which guide how things do work. But again, it's not something that I blame people for, because obviously it's not nice to think about. It takes you out of the experience. It gets in the way of immersion when you're consuming the content. But for that reason, if I encounter someone from this space complaining publicly about, you know, oh, why is XYZ practice so common and accepted in this industry? That's the only time that I'll start to take issue with people choosing to look at an idealized version of the industry rather than being able to acknowledge things like incentives. As I've said before on stream, right? If you are, you know, if you're a fan, you know, you're just watching VTubing so that you can escape from the nitty-gritty of everyday life, I understand why you would not want to look at some of these things that require you to kind of punch a hole in your own immersion. Because let's be honest, nobody wants to do that. Not even me, not even any, you know, even the most cynical of drama tubers would probably prefer to be able to retain at least a little bit of the rose-tinted lenses that they wear when they're watching their favorite, you know, VTuber or whatever, right? So that's not something I begrudge anyone for wanting to preserve. But if you are going to get on a soapbox and then start, you know, starting to level moral imperatives here and there about, oh, why is the industry the way that it is? Why is XYZ practice so common? Why does no one combat this thing? Then I'm going to start being a bit more critical of, okay, are you looking at incentives? Are you acknowledging the realities of this industry, etc., 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 etc.? I think it's a pitfall of considering it as exclusively a hobby and not at least partially a business. Yeah, that is I think that's a good point, Basil. That is quite a big part of it, in my opinion. Oh, Adam, welcome to the stream. Welcome to the stream. But yeah, how do I say this? I have had, okay, so a lot of the streams that I end up doing involve being willing to kind of pick apart the sausage to see how it's made, you know, peeking behind the curtain, so to speak. And the thing is, I've had some people, you know, some people among the Footstools reach out to me privately and say that this allows them to perceive aspects of the industry with a bit more quote-unquote objectivity. And one thing I want to be really careful to emphasize to you guys is, while I do aim to hopefully give you more, I suppose, the equipment to be able to discern and verbalize a more nuanced and or objective view of the industry, I want you to avoid falling into the pitfall of assuming that objectivity automatically makes you like better or superior than anybody else. Because it's not as straightforward as that, right? I've had some people reach out to me and go, something along the lines of, after watching your content, I feel like I can view the industry in more of an objective way. And when I talk to, other people from, other people in various different other aspects of the industry or other communities or from other communities, I see that the way that they perceive things is not as objective. And I wonder, should I share this information or not? And the thing that I've always tried to emphasize to you guys is, actually, I'll phrase it the same way that I phrased it to that particular Footstool, right? Objectivity is like an expensive escort. If someone's interested, they will probably let you know. But if someone is not interested, it doesn't matter how good you are at selling things. No matter what you do or say, you will eventually be seen as nothing more than just a pest. So it's better to simply avoid doing so unless you are explicitly invited. Consent is important in more areas of life besides just sex. And when it comes to, perceiving your entertainment or where it comes from in a certain way, right? It is very much the case where being quote-unquote objective can very much make your experience worse. Because, and again, this is the thing that I kept looping on before about how there is a part of me that really, really doesn't want to do a stream about FaZe. But when you try to put yourself in a position where you look at things in a more quote-unquote objective way, or you embrace a more cynical perspective on how your entertainment is made, there is a very real possibility that you risk becoming disillusioned with it. And disillusionment kill. It is poison to the sort of joy and whimsy that this industry is rightfully known for. So, again, it's the same sort of thing that I've always tried to emphasize, but if all of you, right, you all know what my content is, especially, my regulars. When you tune into my stream, you know what you're getting into, right? You know what you sign up for. A lot of you, I've noticed this, but a lot of you tune into my streams because you've kind of already hit that, along your own journey as a VTuber fan, you've already kind of developed a degree of disillusionment and or cynicism, and it's almost therapeutic to hear somebody else verbalize the same thoughts or the same line of thinking, I suppose. But again, the point is that when you tune into my stream, you do so voluntarily, you do so at your own discretion. You have complete control over how much of my content, how much of my ideas, how much of my, my words, my ways of thinking penetrate into your own consciousness. That is, you have the on and off switch in your hand, right? But the same cannot be said for anyone who is outside of this space that we share, right? This is why we have this, this little community, right, that we've built up, where we all know and have expectations for how we look at things and discuss things. But it is unreasonable to impose those same ways of thinking or, ways of looking at things outside of this space. So, again, that's why I put so much emphasis on saying, all of the concepts, or if you glean anything from these streams, don't share it with other people unless invited by them to do so. Because I don't think that looking at VTubing the way that I do makes me any better, quote unquote, than the average VTuber fan. It just makes it so that when things go wrong, I'm not as surprised. And I'm not as disappointed. Yes, I think there's an argument to be made, and this is why I make the content that I do, right? I do think that there's an argument to be made that if you are more conscious of things like underlying incentives, how stigma works as a tool, not just as this nebulous thing that shapes human interaction, you do have a greater degree of influence or control over how things like the entertainment industry that you occupy evolves. You could potentially have a more active role in trying to push it in a certain direction. Again, that's why I make the content that I do. That's why I try to give you guys the concepts that I give you, so that you have, you know, tools to verbalize how you think and feel, etc., etc. But again, I don't think it is reasonable to push those on people who haven't consented to, you know, absorbing that information, so to speak. I get called a doom poster sometimes, yeah. And again, a lot of the content that I have made on this channel does kind of fall into doom posting. Or I can understand why some people would look at it and go, okay, that's basically doom posting. But yeah. We've reached the don't be an idiot on my behalf part of an armchair stream. Kind of. Because, how do I say this? It is not I suppose, it can be kind of isolating, right? If you do look at something... when you hit a certain degree of pattern recognition, it can be quite an isolating feeling where you can feel like... There are times where you feel like you can see the car crash happening before it does, and yet you don't know whether you should tell the people around you because, you know, you might disturb them or something. And I can understand why you might get the urge to share that. But again, that's what this little space is for, right? Because here, we are used to seeing car crashes, for better or for worse. So, we can freely observe why we think they are happening and then list the reasons as to why we have that prediction. I don't consider it doom posting, just more an analytical aspect of VTubing and why things are done. Yeah. One of the things that I suppose I have kind of softened my stance on a little bit is when I did first start out making content of this nature, I was very much in the camp of, oh, VTubing audiences could do with a bit more, with a bit more analytical thinking, etc., etc., etc. And I still do think that VTubing audiences could do with quite a bit more critical thinking, but analytical thinking is something else entirely. It is something that I no longer think is something that everyone can or should do, I suppose. Because I've come to appreciate over the time that I've spent making my content how much trying to approach this industry analytically can take you out of being able to enjoy it as an entertainment medium. We are the SCPs. I don't know if I'd go that far. I think SCPs is a bit much, but again, I do think that it is not a sin to question why things work the way that they do, but I think it would be a shame if you assume that everyone else was obligated to as well. And I don't think that, well, how do I say this? Being a cynic doesn't make you better than anybody else. Yes, it might make you more difficult to disappoint, but that is a rather sore victory if it means that you can no longer enjoy the things that you used to enjoy, if that makes sense. Again, these are thoughts that I've had for quite a while churning around in my head. I probably haven't verbalized them the best that I could. I will likely end up coming back to harp on this point at some point in the future. But yeah. We are the... Yeah, exactly. I would very much like to remain as just observers, right? That's also why I insist on the rule of not touching the poo, so to speak. Because if you go in and you end up shifting things in a direction so you can talk about them later, I don't like that, personally. That's not a form of analysis that I approve of, because that becomes more like rigging a theatrical play than, actually taking the time to analyze something the way that it happened organically. It can be painfully isolating from a cynic here. Yeah. Not everyone wants to see how the sausage is made. Yeah. And I don't think anyone should be made to, so to speak. Now, I do also have a caveat in that if you are going to make an assertion to other people, if you're going to tell other people how they should think and feel, then yes, I do think you have an obligation to be a bit more analytical, a bit more willing, tolerant to seeing and discussing how the sausage is made. But if that isn't, if you don't fall into that category, then yeah, I can understand not wanting to engage with it. Average VTuber fan is probably immersed in too emotionally invested in VTubers, sometimes companies. They don't see the companies primarily as corporate businesses. Yeah, I will say, I've still remained the same on the view that failing to see companies as, profit-driven entities is a mistake. I do think that humanizing, personifying companies is a mistake. But what I don't blame people for is looking at things like, the incentives that might guide the behavior of their favorite content creators, for example. Or even considering the idea that their favorite content creators may not be, exactly the way that they choose to present themselves online. Because obviously an assertion like that is, at this point it's kind of like at least for us, it's kind of like a no shit Sherlock kind of thing. But I think a lot of people, quite understandably, opt to avoid thinking about that just so they can enjoy the content as is. And I mean, who am I to deny someone their right to enjoy something? That's why, again, like I said, tuning into my content, tuning into the way that I think about things is a voluntary experience, and I hope that it remains so. It's all fun and games and yes. I try to, but the peasants are too unruly for me to stay rational when conversing with them. I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, I would advocate for avoiding falling into the pitfall of perceiving people as peasants because they don't share the same way of looking at things, right? Yes, if the object... Okay, so I think it's very important to take into context, right? The context of the conversation before you make a judgment like that. If the conversation is something bad is happening and I don't know why it's happening, then yeah, sure. I think in that scenario, it's all right to start thinking of, if someone refuses to engage in critical thinking at that point, in that conversation, then yeah, sure. I think it's all right to, kind of thumb your nose at them a little bit. But if that's not the context... If that's not the immediate context in which the conversation is happening, then I would advise you to refrain from that kind of way of thinking. Because the problem is that the problem with that is when you feel superior to somebody else because you believe yourself to be more objective than they are, you put a bit too much stock in, I suppose... The thing about relying on prejudice is you need to be very careful to ensure that it is constantly informed by data. You never want to get to the point where you are operating off of just prejudice alone. Prejudice based off of data can be a very potent weapon for predicting when something bad is going to happen, but prejudice based off of something that isn't data is an unreliable advisor for shaping your thoughts and actions. Call me lazy, but I don't interact with VTuber/company servers for that same reason anyways. I don't know if I can stay sane when they are fervently defensive. I don't begrudge anyone their defensiveness. I do find it to be amusing or bemusing at times, perhaps. But I don't hold it against anyone if they are defensive of something that they like or love. Because I can understand that. Now, if your objective is to improve it in some way, for example, to reduce the chances of it exploding or imploding, or to advocate for a better practice surrounding it, then the conversation shifts, right? Then I'm going to start expecting that you are going to put your feelings about it aside for even a little bit, just so that you can, perhaps attempt a more, at risk of phrasing it poorly, a more realistic assessment of how things are. But besides that, yeah, I don't really expect people to. Sorry, let me rephrase. I expect people to be more defensive of those things. I can't hate them for it, but it's frustrating. Yeah, that I understand. Right? If they can engage in civil discussion, it's fine. Yeah. That's what you. That's when you go from noticer to edgy wignat. Yeah. But being cynical is fun. It can be. But I've realized that I think it's a very specific subsect of people with a very specific kind of psychological way of a very specific way of thinking that is required to enable cynicism to actually be fun. Because I think that for the majority of people, being cynical about things actually saps the enjoyment out of stuff. And it's not for everyone, but I think that that's the way it works for the majority of people. Gotta have a little positivity. That's the other thing, right? I don't think cynicism and positivity is like inherently at odds with one another as concepts, right? I'm pretty sure that you can be positive about something even if you are cynical about it. Like, for example, if you acknowledge that your favorite, let's say, for example, as a thought experiment, right? Let's say you have a company that makes content that you like, right? You have a company that has VTubers that you like. The company will only treat the VTubers well because the VTubers are currently making money, right? That's kind of a cynical way of viewing it. But at the same time, it doesn't really get in the way of your enjoyment so long as things are going well, right? There is a chance that positivity and cynicism can coexist with one another as concepts. It's not very common, but it's not automatically mutually exclusive, I would say. I mean, I'm pretty positive. Yeah, so the thing about being cynical is that it shouldn't stop you from being able to feel positively about things, it should stop you from being able to feel positively about things. If you are, then I'd argue that that's something else besides cynicism. Cynicism is just the ability to acknowledge when people act out of self-interest, right? Or that people do have a tendency to act out of self-interest. I prefer cynicism to temper expectations. Yeah. And again, that's the other aspect of it, right? Cynicism, because it tempers your expectations, makes you more difficult to disappoint, which eventually it might add up to a net positive in terms of how good you feel about something. About the sapped enjoyment, I think being cynical lowers your average enjoyment about everything, for sure, but it enables a relatively stable. That's an excellent way of putting it, actually. I mean, if you think about, the positive spectrum of emotions you can feel, right? Essentially what cynicism ends up doing is usually you have you have a degree of positive feeling or negative feeling. You have this spectrum. What cynicism essentially does is it kind of caps off a little section in the middle of the spectrum where, the range of emotions that you can feel is probably a little narrower than it would have been otherwise, but your degree of emotionality tends to remain quite stable. So you don't need to worry about going towards either extreme, for good or for better or for worse. And that tends to be the way that cynicism seems to function, at least in my experience. The curious thing for the 5. Oh, my brothers, am I then cruel? But I say that which is falling should also be pushed. Yes. It's what you make of it. Yeah, kind of. Scratch a cynic and you will often find a disappointed idealist. Idealists exist to be disappointed. But yeah. It's basically like a voltage regulator. Yeah, I think that's a suitable analogy, yeah. Cynicism helps to remove the rose-tinted glasses first, then ask if you can accept what you're dealing with. Yeah. Not everyone is built to handle cynicism, I suppose. The thing that makes that depressing is sometimes that means that they become more vulnerable to exploitation at the hands of cynics. It's like I've said before. You have to set a cynic to catch a cynic. You can't expect idealists to be able to tussle with cynics, because they will always end up being exploited by them. But yeah, it's just something you have to deal with. On a more positive note for us, Mugen's YouTube has just reached 500. Yeah, no, I saw that. There's a roller coaster of emotions. Cynics don't experience the high highs, but it can be drawn out for longer because there's a protection from unexpected lows. Yeah, I think that's the way that I've come to think of it as well. I think I like the voltage regulator analogy more though. Me too. Cynicism is like anything else. You need some to function, but too much can be just as bad as not enough. Yeah. Most things are best in moderation. I love quoting Nietzsche to random people because then I get to see their confused faces trying to make sense of his philosophy. Nietzsche is a mean philosopher to use if you're just dipping people in head first. But speaking of cynicism, that brings us quite conveniently to the next thing that I wanted to yap about for a little bit, which is this. A tweet that Offkai made 2 days ago, June 10th, where they announced that starting to go forwards, they were going to start asking for people to show them their IDs when lining up to go for a VTuber meet and greet. Now, the announcement itself, the original announcement, goes as the following, quote, "Attention, meet and greet attendees. For Offkai Gen 4, we are requiring a verification check of a government-issued ID during queue. Please make sure you bring one before waiting to meet your Oshi, or you won't be able to attend the meet and greet. Passport emoji, star emoji." Now, as you can probably predict, reactions to this were mixed. So for context, this is an announcement that came out after all of the lotteries for the meet and greets have been bought and paid for. So immediately, probably not the best timing. But on top of that, as you can probably imagine, some people had issue with the idea of trying to flash your ID to just a random Offkai volunteer, just so you can do a meet and greet with a VTuber, right? Because they... Sorry, give me a second. Alright. So, fun little factoid about California as a state in America. Apparently you don't necessarily need a government ID to turn up and vote. So there is a degree of absurdity to the fact that when you go to the state, you don't need an ID to go and vote in an election. But you need an ID to speak to an anime woman via a screen. So again, automatically you have that degree of laughability to it. But on a more serious note, a lot of people had issues with the idea of just flashing their ID to a random person. And again, we'll get into where that discomfort comes from in a little bit. However, you may notice a few things that are missing from this announcement. First, they didn't acknowledge that they are only making this announcement after the lotteries are all bought and paid for. That already probably not getting off on a great start there. Second, they haven't included any sort of reasoning, expectation, or rationale behind why they decided to do this. First, why did they decide to do this? And second, why did they decide to only announce it now? Right? Because if you are going to do things, okay, for context, just think about it, right? This is VTubing. It's an entire industry built off of the idea that who you are in real life should be disconnected or can be disconnected from who you are IRL. privacy is a pillar of why this industry exists. And so if you're going to ask people to flash their government ID to speak to a VTuber, you're probably going to want a justification for asking for that degree of personal information. Now, some people have raised the pretty valid point that when you go to collect your badges for the con, you are going to need to show them some form of ID anyways, just to confirm that you, the person who bought that badge, are indeed the same person who's collecting it on the day. That makes sense. However, the issue is more so how many times do you have to give this information and how many different people you have to give it to. But there's another aspect to that, well, a lot of the people who are trying to advocate on Offkai's behalf don't seem to be touching on, which is, it is one thing to flash your ID to somebody at a con just so you can get your badge to enter the convention. It is another thing to flash your ID to a volunteer at a con in a way that signals that you are a fan of a specific VTuber. And the problem with Offkai is that they have had controversies in the past that stem from specific staff members having grudges against specific VTubers. And when you have that context for Offkai specifically, that whole thing of asking people to show their IDs at meet and greets specifically, that becomes a bit more of a loaded request than it would be otherwise. Hold on, let me see. There's a difference between getting into the con or getting a drink. I was told that some people checking IDs need certain certifications from security things, not just a random volunteer. Okay, so the thing is, right? Could be illegal as well, I don't know. That's the problem. So one of the things that you'll notice is because of the lack of information provided in this announcement on its own, right? People have been left to essentially rationalize this decision all on their own. So one of the things that over the course of the 2 days since this announcement was made, what I ended up seeing a lot was you had the first wave of people responding to this who were saying, this is a bad idea, why would you choose to do this, etc, etc, etc. And then, as you know, after you waited like 1 day, you started getting people who were trying to counter that initial wave of, doubt and dubiousness by rationalizing reasons as to why Offkai would choose to do this. By, saying things like, okay, maybe it's an anti-scalping thing. Maybe it's for security reasons to act as a deterrent against people acting like monkeys once they actually get into the meet and greet. And again, both of those reasons are actually, they're logical, they make sense. But the problem is, because Offkai hasn't given any sort of indication as to what their justification is, the people who are advocating for the con, advocating on behalf of staff, coming up with these, in some cases, quite logical reasons as to why this is not some sort of nefarious scheme, they are essentially just left on their own to try and advocate for the con in the absence of the con advocating for itself. And that was the thing that really got under my skin when I was looking at the way that the reaction to this announcement was unfolding. Hold on. Charlie, thank you for the 2. Not gonna lie, I discriminate against people who are against boomer tubers. Very in character, I can understand that. Yeah, that doesn't sound great, right? So the thing is, right, Lumi, what you said just then about how, there's a possibility that the people who are going to be looking at the IDs and confirming whether you are actually the person who has, the ticket to go to the meet and greet, etc., that they need some sort of special certification. The problem is, anybody who is making an argument like that, I have yet to see a single instance where they are able to speak from a place of absolute authority, because they are not part of the con. They're not part of the people who are representing or who are organizing the con. It's just con attendees or other creators who take it upon themselves to advocate on behalf of Offkai. Which, again, I can understand if you want to do that, if you care about the con. That's perfectly fine. But what I take issue with is the fact that the con itself, Offkai, from their official accounts, as I've talked about before on this channel, there is nothing stopping them from making these clarifications via their own social media and accounts. It's not even that complicated. The first tweet that kind of, made me go, okay, Offkai's doing the same thing that it did in the past again, was this. So, this was a tweet that False made yesterday, quote tweeting Offkai's, sorry, give me a second. Alright, so, this was a tweet that False made yesterday, right? Where he quote tweeted the original announcement and he said, quote, received clarification from Offkai Expo that this policy only applies to their officially hosted meet and greets. The numerous other meet and greets planned to be held at vendor booths are not required to follow this policy. Vendors may decide to require ID per their own choosing. Now, when I saw this tweet, the first question that popped into my head was, why is False doing this? Like, again, I understand if they approached False, they gave him information, and then he chose to do it of his own accord, right? I'm not questioning his motives for doing this. What I'm questioning is why Offkai did not deem it necessary to give this information via their own account. Why did they have to go through False? He's not running the con. So, what gives? And the other thing is, if you've been keeping track of, the various things that have been going on with Offkai since 2024, you may get a sense of deja vu from seeing this, because this is almost an exact reflection of what Offkai did last year when they put out that shoddy PR statement about the problems that were going on, the technical issues that were happening with FaZe Connect's panel there, when they released a statement on the day of, basically going, something along the lines of, there were technical issues, etc., etc., etc. We value our friends at FaZe very much, etc., etc., etc. And then nothing else, right? No explanation of what was going on, no explanation of who made the call, yada, 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 etc., etc., etc. And in the absence of them making a detailed statement from their official accounts, one of their moderators in the actual Twitch stream where the FaZe panel was being broadcasted from started going rogue and started essentially saying that it was FaZe's call to start playing ads instead of actually streaming the panel or the concert thingy itself, or well, not concert, but like the performance itself, in a way that made it sound like FaZe was being thrown under the bus. And anyone and their mother and dog could come to the conclusion upon seeing those messages that was probably not something that the moderator should have said, and that was also an example of, well, people looked through the moderator's social medias and they found that he had a bit of a grudge against Pippa. So obviously, when you put those two little bits of context together, it doesn't look great for Offkai. So people started assuming that it was sabotage rather than, just normal technical difficulties. And then what ended up happening was someone at Offkai, a mysterious staffer at Offkai, ended up approaching False and then giving him information behind the scenes in an attempt to confirm to the public that it was not in any ways malicious, and that the moderator that went rogue had since been removed from Offkai's staff. So, the problem is, though, again, I had the same question when I was looking at this originally. Why is Offkai using False as their PR rep? Because that's not his job. If you're going to address the public, why not do it from your official account? If you're going to say something as, let's be honest, non-controversial as one of our employees, well, not employees, but one of our representatives acted out of line That representative has since been removed from our roster. We regret the way that things have transpired, and we hope that you understand that we are not a malicious group of actors. It is a very simple message to get out to the public. My question is, why didn't Offkai do that from their official accounts? Because the problem is, not only have they throttled the degree to which people are going to be aware that this even happened, right? The thing is, okay, hold on. Okay, let me backtrack a little bit. If you are any group, right? A community, a business, some sort of entity that consists of multiple people working together under the same cause or banner, it is always a good idea to very clearly ostracize and expel bad actors among your ranks. The problem with extremists is that they poison the well. So if you do encounter an extremist in your ranks, expel them. And it is objectively a good and healthy thing when you expel a bad actor in a public manner. The problem is, in this particular case, Offkai, instead of making it public that they had observed, noticed, and dealt with the moderator problem, they decided to go to false and essentially restrict the public's awareness that they had, they'd taken this corrective measure to just the people who watch false, which is a lot of people, but it's not nearly the same as if they went via their official accounts and made that announcement that way. And also, you have the added, shall I say, disadvantage of making this look like someone had to go behind the scenes, underneath Offkai's nose and share this information in a covert fashion, instead of just declaring it outright. Look, we fucked up. One of our representatives spoke out of line. We've dealt with it. It's not going to be a problem in the future. Like, what? Why could they not have said that? And the thing is, when this happened, yeah, it was a little bit odd, right? But I could kind of hand wave it away as, okay, maybe they'll learn for next time. The problem is, this is next time, and the strategy is still the same. They've made an announcement, they've forgotten a crucial detail in that announcement, which is the scope of the policy. How many meet and greets is it going to apply to? Is it going to apply to all meet and greets in the convention? Or is it just going to be, the meet and greets that are officially hosted by Offkai themselves? It's the latter, but again, if you looked at the original announcement on its own, you wouldn't know that. And so, when they approached False with this information, and False decided to do this, what would have happened if he decided not to? What do you do then? You just not give the information? What? And this habit, at this point, it's become what looks like a coincidence, right? One's an anomaly, two is a coincidence, three is a pattern. It's starting to look like a coincidence where Offkai has 2 years in a row now sat back while making a decision that would cause backlash and wouldn't be popular among all of their attendees and audience, and then waited for somebody else to come in and clarify things on their behalf. Now, again, I can kind of understand if they approach False with this information, because his content is news, right? So I can understand if this is a mutually beneficial transaction of sorts. He gets a bit of exclusive information, they get to save face while communicating a clarification to the public, right? Mutually beneficial. I'm not going to overlook that, but I can understand that. What I don't understand, however, is when this policy, this PR strategy of sitting back and hoping that your supporters go to bat for you instead of saying anything yourself, starts to essentially invite others who don't have as mutual a relationship with you as someone like False might to go in and, clarify things on your behalf, when instead it becomes a clarification that somebody else chooses to make on your behalf that comes at a cost to them in some way. And that is what happened with the second tweet that kind of made me look at this and go, okay, why aren't they saying anything? Which was this tweet by Pippa, where she said, quote, I'm going to get shit for this, but I think this is to cut down on scalpers, reselling, meet and greet tickets, plus stalkers/weirdos. Yes, the VTuber is on a screen, but stalkers show up, feel emboldened by making the VTuber uncomfortable, their behavior escalates, etc. I could imagine, especially, some of the larger agency VTubers being concerned about this and potentially asking for some sort of system in place, but that's just the theory. Now, there are two specific phrases in this tweet that, how do I say, that are very emblematic of how Offkai fucked up their communication on this specific announcement. Does anybody know what those two phrases are? Oh, actually, before I go any further, I want to make this very, very clear, right? My views on this situation, what I'm saying and what I'm about to say, they are not at all reflective of Pippa at all. They are not reflective of the Kapipis. This is not me, like, yes, I'm speaking as a fan of her, but this is not reflective of her community in any way, right? This is just me voicing my personal opinion on this. I want to make that very clear. Yeah, there we go. A lot of people have picked up on it, I think. But the thing that really, the thing that annoys me when I see this is I'm going to get shit for this. She knows that this is not going to be an opinion that everyone is going to agree with. And she knows that there is a chance that some blowback might reach her as a result of her voicing this rationalization of this decision. A rationalization that, mind you, is actually quite reasonable. This is a very reasonable assessment as to the motivations behind why they would want to implement a feature like this. However, the problem is, she is saying this, going out on a limb, sticking out her neck, without any sort of concrete affirmation or confirmation as to what the reasoning and rationale behind this decision is by Offkai themselves. And that is the thing that really annoys me upon seeing this interaction, because one of the things that I've seen on Twitter is one of the responses that I saw, which kind of baffled me a little bit, was when someone tried to refute the, how do I say? So when someone tried to say, like, when someone tried to refute the accusation that Offkai was, Offkai couldn't be trusted with this information because they were full of people who had vendettas against specific talents who were part of their con, right? And one of the rebuttals that I saw was someone saying something along the lines of, "You underestimate how much the staff are fans of Pippa," or something along those lines, right? Something along the lines of, "Oh, they wouldn't do something, they wouldn't discriminate against you for being a FaZe fan because they're all big fans of Pippa themselves." And I mean, yeah, sure. I can certainly see, a lot of the volunteers, a lot of the staff at Offkai being fans of Pippa. But in my opinion, that makes this worse. Because if you are a fan of Pippa, you know that if you are going to post something like this, as sparse an announcement as this is, information-wise, and people are going to start dogpiling on you, quite understandably, given the prior context of the kind of volunteers that they have allowed into their staff or into their ranks, that she's probably going to end up feeling some sort of pressure to go and say something on your behalf. Pippa has established a pattern of rooting for Offkai. She cares about the con a lot. And so she's going to stick out her neck and, say something like this to clarify a motivation or a rationale on behalf of the con and its staff. She has advocated for them before. She did this last year, where she quite rightly pointed out that, if you have issues with the way that Offkai makes their decisions, that doesn't mean that every volunteer is like evil or whatever, right? To avoid demonizing the entire con just because they have bad apples. Now again, there are aspects of that stance that I don't quite agree with personally, but the point remains that Pippa has an established pattern of advocating on behalf of Offkai because she cares about it and the people who run it. And if you know that, why would you make your announcement so bare information-wise? Because the thing is, if you have a reason for implementing this measure, why wouldn't you say it? It's not like this is a stigmatized thing to fight against scalpers. If anything, the majority of people in this industry will be able to empathize with the experience of being fucked over by a scalper and would also appreciate if you took some sort of countermeasure against scalping. There is no reason why this justification that Pippa went out of her way to provide on Offkai's behalf couldn't have been provided by Offkai themselves. And that's the thing that annoys me about this announcement, because it could have included that information itself, and it should have been included by Offkai. I don't know who they have running their public communications or their social medias, but there are aspects of this announcement, a lot of aspects of this announcement, that personally, I probably would have changed. And not in the sense of altering the way that, not necessarily altering the information they do provide, but simply adding in information that should have been there in the first draft of this. And because I don't want to just complain about this without giving any sort of alternative, right? I want to look at this announcement in and of itself in terms of what it could have looked like, what it could have included, and how potentially it could be, done better next time. So, when you're looking at this announcement, few things that it's missing, right? First, you need to acknowledge the context in which you are saying this to your public, to your audience, right? Which is, you are saying this, you are imposing a new restriction on the meet and greets after people have already paid and, won in the lotteries for the meet and greets. You have to acknowledge that. If you don't acknowledge that, you come off tone deaf and condescending, right? Tone deaf at best, dismissive at worst, right? So, some of the minimum requirements that you're going to need in this announcement, if Offkai were to make this all over again, right? Obviously, you need a reason for the ID verification. Simply saying that it's going to happen without providing any sort of rationale says to your audience that you take it for granted that they are going to go along with it and that they should go along with it. And look, if you are a con with a massive reservoir of goodwill behind you, sure, fine. But the problem with Offkai is, like I said before, the problems that they have had with vetting their volunteers has created controversies in the past that have diminished that goodwill. And the problem is, if you are going to go for some sort of public-facing message, you need to acknowledge that stuff. If you try to forge ahead as if that didn't happen, fine, you might be able to get a statement out there, but that doesn't mean it's going to be received the way that you intended to. The second thing is, you need to outline the scope of the policy. This was information that False ended up giving, they ended up using False to give to their publics, right? So, there was zero reason why Offkai couldn't include this specific little bit of information in the original announcement. They were going to give it anyways, they just chose to do it through somebody else for some reason. And then finally, just for the sake of optics, right? Just an apology for the late notice. Because regardless of whether you think that the ID verification, again, people are making assumptions as to what the rationale is. You can say that those assumptions are logical or less so, but it doesn't change the fact that those are still, in the absence of a concrete statement by Offkai, just assumptions and speculation, right? People can make assumptions as to, why this policy has been implemented. But universally, everyone can agree that making the announcement after the meet and greet lotteries are done is probably a very poor decision, right? Let's not forget that they also leaked that Kana was joining. It's just, you have so many little examples of a lack of professionalism. that you can't really, at this point, it's a little unreasonable to ignore why some people might have concerns about the degree of professionalism exhibited by your volunteers, right? Oh, I guess it's kind of like in the terminology itself. You don't expect professionalism from people who aren't paid to do what they do, right? So there are three tiers, so to speak, that we can, alter this message according to, right? Tier 1, if we were to just redo this message in a way to hopefully make it go over better, right? The easiest thing to do, because it would require the least amount of concessions or the least change in, how you communicate overall as an entity, as Offkai. No refunds, no acknowledgement of prior controversies. Easiest way of making this announcement, right? Medium difficulty, you have to make some sort of concession, right? Refund for affected lottery winners are offered. If someone is not comfortable with this new policy, because you've only announced it after the lottery's already done, you offer refunds to the people who are affected, right? No acknowledgement of prior controversies, right? Because that's too much. That's too much. And then hard difficulty, the most difficult task of trying to rephrase this announcement so that you both offer refunds for affected lottery winners, because so you have to offer some sort of concession in order to smooth over the fact that you only announced this after everything was paid and done, plus acknowledging prior controversies. And this is the bit that is going to be the most difficult for Offkai to do, because they've gone so long with a PR strategy that revolves around just hoping nobody notices and then only reacting once people make a fuss about it. So, first example of a possible way that you could have done this announcement over, but in a better way, right? When you satisfy, according to, the conditions set out under easy, right? No refunds, no acknowledgement of prior controversies. This is how an alternative version of this statement could have looked, right? And again, this is just me pulling stuff off the top of my head. I didn't have like a team behind me to vet this. So, attention, meet and greet attendees. We have recently received an unexpected... another thing I forgot to mention. This is all assuming that the reason that Pippa speculated was indeed the main reason why, the anti-Scalpy thing was indeed the main reason why they went with this policy. Right? That's already taking a bit of a liberty in order to steel man Offkai's position here. Attention meet and greet attendees. We have recently received an unexpected influx of reports that meet and greet lottery recipients have been attempting to sell on their tickets at an unreasonable markup. Offkai Gen 4 stands against this practice, and, as a countermeasure, we will be requiring a verification check of a government-issued ID during queues for all of our officially hosted meet and greets. Please make sure you bring one before waiting to meet your Oshi. Please also note that this policy will not extend to meet and greets that are planned to be hosted at vendor booths. Vendors may, however, choose to adopt this policy at their own discretion. We apologize for the late notice to our meet and greet lottery winners, but we ask for your understanding as we attempt to ensure a fair and accessible con experience for all. Now, if you are a Kirsha fan, that last bit might not sound very genuine, but the more important part is, at this stage in Offkai's, communicative process, they kind of have to start segregating their audience in the sense of identifying which portions of the audience who are going to see their tweet are going to be receptive to a message that they put out, and which sections are not going to be receptive, regardless of what they say. And I'm going to just make a call that those who do want to believe in Offkai are... Kirinoth, I am, don't worry. Those who are willing to go out on a limb and believe in Offkai as a con, this message will reach them, right? And it falls in line with Offkai's branding. They want to be accessible, they want to be accepting, they want to be inclusive. So it makes sense that your overall rationale for making this decision, implementing this policy, is wanting to ensure a fair, accessible con experience. You don't want scalpers to hog everything, etc., etc. I think that's pretty simple in terms of choosing your target audience and addressing them specifically. The other thing, note that this policy will not extend to meet and greets. Very easy way of just including that little tidbit of information that the they then ended up using false to try and clarify later on. Very easily could have included that in the original announcement. And then also, there is one phrase in the original way that the announcement was constructed that is painful to read from a PR standpoint. And that is this. Please make sure you bring one before waiting to meet your Oshi, or you won't be able to attend the meet and greet. No shit, Sherlock. When you're giving information to an audience, try to avoid reiterating the same thing too many times, especially if that same thing is something that the audience is probably going to be averse to, such as not being able to meet the VTuber that they really wanted to meet. The problem is, again, if you don't include any sort of rationale, reasoning, or explanation as to why you're doing this, or alternatives if you're not comfortable with this course of action going forward, that last little phrase makes it sound very condescending, right? Because we know you're saying that you're implementing a policy where you need to bring government ID in order to speak to your favorite anime girl. We know that if you don't bring the ID, that now means you won't be able to attend the meet and greet. You don't need to say that again. Just say, please make sure you bring one before waiting to see your Oshi, and end the sentence there. And again, the fact that they didn't pick up on this little like tonal thing is part of what convinced me that they don't actually have anyone who doesn't think the exact same way that everyone else on the team thinks. There is no, I don't think that there's a dissenting opinion, a different perspective, because if you were looking at this and you understood how little justification, reason, or advanced warning you were giving your audience, why would you include this phrase? So again, notably, I've chosen to omit that out of this iteration of the announcement, because you don't need to say that. But in any case, the other parts, right? Offkai stands against this practice, making it very clear, this is the reason why you're doing it, this is where you're taking a stand against the practice, you're doing it for the greater good, right? And again, that might sound pretentious to some, but for people who are genuinely invested in the con, they would very much appreciate, you as a con saying that you're doing this for their sake. This is a good thing. If anything, saying something like this, explaining why you're implementing this policy and that you're implementing this policy for the benefit of your attendees is a good thing. Because it assures your attendees that you care about them and that you're doing this for them. Now, whether people agree with that or not is up to individual opinion and debate, but if you're looking at this from an optics standpoint, there is no reason to not include this little bit of information. They could have very easily included it if this was indeed the reason behind this new policy. But it's better than no explicit reason at all. Exactly. And it's better than giving no explicit reason and then sitting back while, other people who may or may not benefit from doing so end up trying to make clarifications on your behalf. When I see Offkai doing this thing, this recurring pattern of making an unpopular decision, then sitting back while their supporters end up speaking up in their stead, I look at that and I think, surely at this point you know what you're doing, right? You surely at this point you've anticipated that this is going to be how things play out, and that this is it. It has to be intentional at this point, right? And that's gross to me. It's always very rough to. It is a very irritating thing, a very frustrating thing, to try and defend something that won't defend itself, right? And when I see people like Pippa speaking up on behalf of Offkai when they are dead silent on their own, it's just, it's a very. Again, I want to make it clear, like this is me saying this, right? My personal opinion, not reflective of her at all. But it's something that I view as being in very poor taste when you as an organization, or the people who are organizing it, right, organizing an event, you know how people are going to react to things, and you start banking on it as a crutch for your own lack of ability to communicate with the public. I find that to be very distasteful. Zan, something nobody has talked about. Will the volunteers get security training on how to recognize real IDs? Yeah, no, that was the thing that Lumi was talking about earlier on in the chat, right? Speculating that, the people who they get to check the IDs at the meet and greets, they probably will need some sort of special certification, right? And again, it would be nice if Offkai clarified whether that would be the case or not. It would certainly go a long way towards quelling people who are saying, oh, this is just an opportunity for volunteers to dox people they don't like, right? It would go a long way towards injecting an image of professionalism back into Offkai's volunteers that they have been bleeding out since last year, but they haven't said shit, even though they could. And this is just, this is the easiest version of how to rewrite this statement, because you don't make any concessions to the people who had a meet and greet, right? And you don't acknowledge any of the prior controversies that might explain why people are a little apprehensive now. On medium difficulty, you have this. Attention, meet and greet attendees. We have recently received an unexpected influx of reports that some meet and greet lottery recipients have been attempting to sell on their tickets at an unreasonable markup. Offkai Gen 4 stands against this practice, and as a countermeasure, we will be requiring a verification check of a government-issued ID during queues for all our officially hosted meet and greets. Now this, no different from the last iteration. Very similar to what is already there, except, you have that added explanation as to why they're implementing the policy to begin with. However, starting from the next paragraph is where things start to change. We apologize for the late notice, and we understand if our sudden implementation of this policy causes you discomfort. As such, we will be offering refunds for all meet and greet lottery recipients who wish to opt out. Please contact us through whatever email they want to use, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. For those who are willing to bear with us, we at Offkai thank you for your understanding as we work to make the event a more fair and accessible experience for all. Please make sure you bring your ID before waiting to meet your Oshi. Please also note that this policy will not extend to meet and greets that are planned to be hosted at vendor booths. Vendors may, however, choose to adopt this policy at their own discretion. Same thing at the end. However, again, here, this is where you start making, again, another segmentation in your intended audience. You start acknowledging separately, individually, people who have won a lottery ticket to go to a meet and greet who are not okay with the new policy versus people who have, who have won a lottery ticket to the meet and greet but are okay with the policy, even if only begrudgingly. And the reason why, in my opinion at least, it would be a good idea for them to break up these two groups and then acknowledge each of them individually is because, again, if you're looking at this from an optics standpoint, it is always a better thing if you are able to communicate with your audience in a way that seems tailored to them specifically. People are not stupid. They can tell when the message has been tailored to them or not. They can tell the difference between something that is addressed specifically at them, even if them is a nebulous group of people, or if it is just a generalized statement that you are too lazy to focus at one distinct group or one distinct individual or recipient. And making this effort to address them separately adds that little touch of, care in the way that you come across that goes a long way towards softening the blow of what you're saying. Oh, Alexis TGF, thank you for the raid. Welcome, raiders, welcome. We're basically digging through the recent announcement that Offkai Expo made that they are now going to be requiring ID checks before you go to a meet and greet with one of the VTubers there, and thinking about possible ways that this announcement could have been rephrased or redone so that it comes across better. But yeah, people are very attuned to corpo speaking boilerplate. Yeah, exactly. Also imagine someone who's like a minor gross goes to a meet and greet thing and then uses a parent's card to get a ticket. How will they confront things like that? Yeah, I would assume that the implication is that they just refuse them entry, right? But yeah, again, the reason why this is not an easy way of fixing it is because this requires Offkai to actually make a tangible concession, right? They're going to have to give refunds. That's the only reason why this is not easy. It's because this is actually going to cost them something if they go ahead with this. But the thing is, if you are going to announce that you are implementing a new policy that is going to affect the way that people approach a meet and greet, and you've already finished the process of handing out the meet and greets and people paying for a chance to win a meet and greet, you are in a position where the announcement, in the absence of a concession like this, makes it look like you are exploiting the timing of your announcement in order to force compliance with your new policy. And you don't want that because of something we've discussed on this channel before. Reactance theory. When people feel like their sense of agency is being taken away from them, they are primed to be averse to whatever it is you are doing or saying. And obviously, if you want to avoid that instinctive, knee-jerk human response, you want to do something that gives people a feeling of agency, even if you are having the final say in a decision that is going to be made pertaining to them. So, saying, look, we get that the timing on this announcement was off. If you want to opt out, you can. Regardless of whether someone has won a ticket or not, that at least makes it look like that you still respect the agency of the people who bought and or received a lottery ticket to go to a meet and greet. Giving people back that sense of agency when you're communicating with them goes a hell of a long way towards reducing the likelihood that they will instinctively react against what it is you are doing or saying. That's just human nature. And again, that is why when you think about the way that, for example, I mean, this is something that happens when it comes to... We actually talked about this relatively recently when we were going through Riot Games' PR strategy, right? Something you will notice with a lot of gaming companies is even when they're trying to push really predatory monetization features onto their audience, they will try to anticipate and then overcome reactance theory in, that sort of knee-jerk reaction in their player base when they sense that a bit of their agency is being taken away from them, by adopting this policy of pushing for a really unreasonable, predatory new feature, and then making these tiny concessions that are, a step back from what they were pushing previously, but still a bit more still a little bit more exploitative than it was to begin with, right? And that's the way that you get around it. You have to give your audience back some feeling of agency. It doesn't matter if the concession is only small. Making a concession is a big step towards disarming that instinctive response. Yes, it may just be optics, but optics still ends up having an effect on audiences in general. That's why the trade exists. And so, again, if Offkai is going to, even something as small as apologizing for the timing of your notice would be considered a concession. Yes, it's not going to be a concession that matters as much as refunding, lottery tickets for people who aren't comfortable with the new policy, but it is going to be a concession that is missing from the original announcement. The only difference between the easy version of the statement and the medium version of the statement is that in this version, the medium version, you have more of a concession, a more tangible concession in the form of reimbursing, refunding the people who don't want to go ahead with this new policy. Since they haven't explained that this is about scalping, we don't know what they're checking on the ID. Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem. That's part of the problem. They haven't explained why they're doing this. They've just stayed silent, and then it's been up to everybody else to speculate on Offkai's behalf why they're implementing the policy. And again, like I said before, a lot of the speculations actually have quite a reasonable basis. Pippa's speculation that it is an anti-scalping measure combined with a security measure makes sense, but it is a disservice is done to it by the fact that Offkai has not made any effort to concretely affirm this via their own official accounts. So it's basically just putting all of the onus onto Pippa and her reputation. when she makes an assertion like that. And that's the part that personally I find to be quite distasteful. Because if something does go wrong, if Offkai fucks up something to do with the way that they do these ID checks, I'm not sure how they would do that, but on the off chance, no pun intended, that happens, what that's going to do is put egg on the faces of everybody who spoke up to advocate on Offkai's behalf, which is going to include Pippa. And that's the part that I don't like about this. That's why I dislike it when organizations like Offkai don't say shit, step back, and wait for other people to speak up on their behalf because they have a sense of personal investment in this organization. It feels exploitative, it feels dirty, and it feels cowardly, which is why I find it to be distasteful. Yeah, Zan, optics are relevant because they affect audience perception, which affects the discourse around Offkai. Yeah, exactly. Current discourse around Offkai reflects their lack of care for optics. Yeah, something that I mentioned when I was criticizing Offkai before is that their PR strategy up until now has been purely reactive. They just wait until, people start talking about something and then they address it. There has been no effort to adopt any sort of proactivity in their communication strategy. Because let me give you an example of something they could have done proactively in this particular case. They had an opportunity when they're upping the security that they have at their con. Ostensibly, for the sake of their VTubers, again, we're assuming this, as, to steelman their position for implementing, to steelman their rationale for implementing this policy, right? If they're doing this as a security measure to hopefully better protect their VTubers and con attendees from scalping or schizos or whatever, right? You had an opportunity to say, we at Offkai care about, the safety of our con attendees. We've had instances in the past where we've let a few volunteers slip through our vetting process, but we have put all of that behind us. We are committed to enforcing strict penalties if there is any mishandling of sensitive information. We have, based on whether they've actually done this or not, right? We've, taken measures to hopefully implement compliance training among our volunteers and especially our staff, etc., etc., etc. And we appreciate if you extend a little bit of trust to us in light of our prior controversies, something along those lines, right? Again, just proactively make some sort of assertion that we understand that we are asking you to provide sensitive information. We understand, given our previous controversies, this might be an example of, information that you might not be so keen to share. We understand all of that, and we are committed to making sure nothing goes wrong, because if someone does do something suspicious or mishandles sensitive information, we are going to punish them. We're going to penalize them. We're going to blacklist them, blah, 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 blah. Another part of the problem that is exacerbated by Offkai's reactive PR strategy, purely reactive PR strategy, I should say, is the fact that they don't seem to have enforced any sort of consequences upon the bad actors amongst their ranks. If you think about all the instances of people who have been representatives of Offkai who have done a disservice to the con by acting out of line or saying something out of line, you have three big examples that come to mind. Captain No Fun is G, the staff member who was responsible for picking panelists earlier on this year, who was a virulent anti-white racist. You have Gustavo BCC, who was the moderator who went rogue during the disappearance of Pippa and Tenma. And you have Soundwave, an AV staff member in 2023, who earlier on this year spilled the beans that a bunch of volunteers had tried to get Pippa pushed out of the con back all those years ago. Now, in each of these three instances, these con members have been removed from the con after their behavior has created backlash among the general public. The problem is, the way that they were removed from the con was not at all emblematic of the con taking the responsibility for vetting its organizers, its representatives, into its own hands. Offkai had no agency in any of their removals in the eyes of the public, because Soundwave, no confirmation as to whether they walked out voluntarily or they were pushed out as a result of Face Connect becoming a major sponsor at Offkai, right? No decision. We had no indication as to whether they were fired or whether they left on their own, besides, their own word. Gustavo wouldn't even be public knowledge that he was removed if it weren't for the fact that some random staff member went to False and then False decided to make a video on it. And then Captain No Fun is G was allowed to, quote-unquote, voluntarily, quote-unquote, step down from his position instead of, being removed for being a virulent anti-white racist on social media. So, in all of these situations, you have a bad actor who comes to define the image of Offkai, who draws public backlash, because that is the reason why Captain No Fun is G stepped down, in quotation marks. But in none of these cases has Offkai come out and made a public statement to clarify that they are taking a stance against these bad actors who have managed to penetrate their ranks. And that is a problem, because now what people are going to assume is that you don't have the capacity to actively vet your own volunteers, vet your own staff members. And so they could have tried a proactive message. Again, I'm not saying that it would have worked given their context, but it would have been better than nothing, where they could have put out a proactive statement saying, look, we are committed to enforcing consequences on any member of staff or volunteers or attendees, right? Regardless of whether you are attendee, volunteer, or staff, whatever. If there is any improper conduct, we are committed to enforcing a penalty on that, whether it be expelling you from the con on the day and or blacklisting you, or other forms of penalty that can be enforced via a contract that volunteers or staff members have to sign. Because mind you, there was a contract that all volunteers had to sign at last year's Offkai about not speaking up on behalf of the con without approval from the executives. Guess which volunteer ended up breaking that clause in their contract. But in any case, again, all it would have taken is a little bit of proactivity. But apparently that is beyond the scope of what Offkai is capable of. Oh, Hero, welcome to the stream. Hopping in during a break, actually curious if they'll address anything. Yeah, me too. I'm not holding my breath though, because this is Offkai. I mean, at this point, information is modus operandi. Kind of, yeah. It feels like they got caught red-handed. Yeah, with Captain No Fun is G, absolutely. It didn't seem like they were going to do anything until, I think it was Deslaris, one of the Face Connect fan, also an fan artist, whose stuff I've seen on Twitter prior to that point. But yeah, I think it was Deslaris who quote tweeted someone who was either quote tweeted. Hold on, let me try and recall. I think quote tweeted someone who was pointing out Captain No Fun is G, and the tweets that they were making about white people, and then basically saying, Offkai, I'm really disappointed that this is something that your con is, that's a part of your con. This is what I, consume VTubing to get away from, etc., etc., etc. I think it's a real shame that this is something that people are, that people are starting to define your con by or something along those lines. And then Offkai responded to that and went, okay, yeah. Don't worry, this person has stepped down. He's no longer part of our staff, right? And the problem is, that was when you should have brought down the guillotine and said, yep, we're not tolerating this behavior, even among staff. They're gone, etc., etc. But instead, no, he got to step down voluntarily. So yeah, that's not going to work. Okay, so yeah, there's Lara's quote tweeted Kitsunera, who was pointing out that, the prior statements made by Captain No Fun is G. But yeah, again, the problem is Offkai does not have a good record when it comes to actually enforcing rules for its volunteers, enforcing codes of conduct, standards for conduct among its volunteers and staff. So What bugs me is that this is the 4th time that they are running this convention. You'd think that they got their shit together. Please understand, small indie convention. But in any case, the next one is hard difficulty, which, to remind you guys, means you have to make a tangible concession in the form of refunds for affected lottery winners, and you have to make an optics concession by acknowledging prior controversies. And the reason why I asterisked this particular thing is because, given what we know about Offkai, or the lack thereof, it is quite literally impossible to come up with a substitute announcement that falls under that category without first getting any sort of indication as to how much of their prior controversies are they willing to acknowledge. Because the way that this section, right, so essentially most of this statement, most of this iteration of the announcement is the exact same as the prior one. The only bit that has changed is this section, where they formally, hypothetically, address their prior controversies and attempt to reframe what they're currently doing in light of, committing to making sure what happened before doesn't happen again. The problem is, this section changes drastically based on how far they are willing to go back into the past and address, how much they're willing to address in terms of the reasons why some people distrust this convention. Let me explain what I mean by that. Let's say, for example, that they were only willing to go so far back as Captain No Fun is G, right? If that was the only thing that they were willing to acknowledge, then this would probably look something along the lines of, we understand that some of our staff members in the past have displayed conduct that does not represent our organization or our event in the way that we would like. But since then, we have committed to, and then again, another factor is what have they actually done behind the scenes, if anything, to prevent that same thing from happening again. But hypothetically, they could say something along the lines of, we understand that they have not been the best representatives of our organization or our event, and as a result, as a countermeasure, since that time, we have implemented more measures, countermeasures such as compliance training. We are more committed to revitalizing our code of conduct. We have a set of policies regarding how our representatives, our staff, our volunteers are expected to handle themselves, etc., etc. We understand if you have reservations about us from back then, but we would appreciate if you continue to support us, etc., 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 right? Again, I'm not going to lie and pretend that that's going to go over well with everyone. It's absolutely not. But it is, if you are going to acknowledge a prior controversy, probably something along those lines would be one of the better ways to do it. However, if they were to go so far as to acknowledge, let's say, we're also approaching this from the perspective of they're not going to acknowledge the Kirsha thing, right? So let's assume that they wanted to also acknowledge the things that happened between Soundwave's claims of Offkai's staff trying to push out Pippa 2 years ago, plus Gustavo BCC from last year, right? Let's say that they were willing to go as far back as that when they were acknowledging prior controversies. Then it would probably go something along the lines of, we understand in the past that some of our representatives have expressed attitudes or inappropriate attitudes or conduct towards certain con attendees or certain patrons of our convention. We want to take a moment to reassure all of you that we value each and every one of the talents and sponsors that have been generous enough to support us, and we have a zero tolerance policy towards those who would seek to impugn their good standing or reputation or seek to harm them in any way, whether it be an attendee, a member of staff, or a volunteer, etc., etc., etc. Again, a little long-winded, not perfect, kind of a little sloppy on the toppy that it gives to the sponsors and stuff. But when you have accidentally let in, essentially, antis into your staff roster, I'd say that that warrants a little bit of sloppy toppy to the sponsors that have been caught in the crossfire. But again, changes drastically in terms of what you say, depending on how far back you are willing to go, and how much you are willing to bare your arse to your audience and your sponsors in light of prior controversies. Billy, I'll take my leave because I gotta go sleep and dream about No problem, Billy. Thanks for tuning in as long as you have, and I hope you have a nice rest. But again, Offkai is far from being out of options when it comes to things they could have said. There are any number of ways that they could have worded this statement to make it better. What I have given here is just one alternative of many. Yes, they probably should have included all of these talking points in some way, shape, or form, but there are a lot of ways that they could have chosen to phrase this. And this is, like I said, just one example, so that I'm not just talking out of my ass and just complaining without giving any sort of alternative solution. So, again, they could have included this information, but they didn't. And the problem is, this is way too similar, to the point of, giving a sense of deja vu, to the kind of lack of communication and the problems that created for the convention last year. And that's the bit that gets my pattern recognition jogging. That's why when I look at this, it comes across as extra distasteful to me. Because Offkai has been in this position before, where they have made a decision that proves unpopular with a vocal part of their audience, and then, rather than address it formally, using their official accounts, they have sat back and allowed third parties to do the heavy lifting on their behalf. And again, some of those third parties, fine, I can understand. For example, False, who has a bit of a symbiotic relationship with Offkai in that specific scenario, because they get clarification, they get an opportunity at clarification while he gets content. But for someone like Pippa, who is a supporter of the convention and doing this essentially just because she cares, that feels wrong to me. Now, I understand that this is not going to be the way that a lot of other people feel. A lot of Kapipis might not agree with me. I don't think that Pippa herself would agree with me. Right? And like I said, this is just my own view. It's not reflective of anybody besides me. But to me, it feels gross. Because it feels like they are using people like Pippa as a crutch for their own lack of ability to communicate. Now, why they're not capable of communicating, I have no fucking clue. I don't know if it's incompetence. I don't know if it's cowardice. I don't know if it's simple ineptitude. But for some reason or other, they haven't been able to communicate this information themselves. And it's been left to, literally anybody else to come pick up the pieces. Sometimes they're good actors, like False or Pippa. Sometimes they're malicious actors, like Gustavo or Soundwave. But either way, it's out of Offkai's hands, which works for you sometimes, but I would make the argument that it's unsustainable in the long run. Because if you're not going to take control of the way that you communicate, if you're not going to defend yourself from accusations of, malicious practice, why should it fall onto anybody else to defend you? If you're not going to advocate for yourself, why would you expect other people to advocate for you? Makes no sense. And when other people are taking it upon themselves to advocate for you, they bear the cost for doing so. And eventually, if that cost grows too much, don't expect to still have an advocate. But in any case, that's about all I have to say about the fucking Offkai thing. Again, those who tuned into the last stream that I did talking about, I think it was the stream that I did on the last stream that I did on the I think this was the last stream that I did on the Vice article on Kirsha, the second one. But, yeah, no, this... You would be familiar with me having this rant about how Offkai is passive and reactive in the way that they communicate, right? But it's just annoying to see that they've had an entire year to pretty much understand why this is not a good PR strategy, and they haven't seemed to have learned shit. It's the exact same thing playing out again and again. Both with... It's funny because when I see, False providing the clarification about the scope of the policy, it not including vendors unless they choose to be included on their own, combined with, Pippa, posting a take that she knows she might get shit for on Offkai's behalf. It's the exact same thing that happened last year. I didn't include this in I didn't include this in my discussion of it when I was talking about Offkai from last year. But if you look at the clips where Pippa is talking about Offkai and talking about how, if you have an issue with the way that the con is run, best way to change it is to volunteer yourself. Not everyone at Offkai is evil. Don't generalize the entire convention based off of the actions of a few bad actors. It's kind of cringe when you go and attack everyone at the con because of a perceived slight against a creator you care about, right? All of which being pretty reasonable takes. If you look into the comments of some of those clips, you get people that are, you get this varying range of reactions from people outright dismissing what she's saying, basically shaking their heads and going, she's just being naive, right? Or just outright saying that what she's saying is, stupid, right? And the thing is, that is a degree of... What essentially happens is when someone advocates on your behalf, they volunteer themselves to tank any degree of negativity or some degree of the negativity that is directed at you. And that was what Pippa was doing last year, and that's what she is kind of, acknowledging that she's doing here. And I mean, if you are a con, if you're a fan, why would you Okay, I don't want to say why would you permit that, because that's... I don't want to make it seem like this wasn't a decision that Pippa made. This wasn't a statement. I don't want to make it sound like this was a statement that Pippa didn't choose to make herself, right? Because that would be stupid of me to do. But at the same time, you could make it at least a little bit easier for people to speak up on your behalf by providing some sort of concrete affirmation that what they're speculating about your best case motivation actually, that it's actually true, right? If you're going to get other people to stick out their necks on your behalf, at least make it so that they don't have to stick out their necks too far. Or at least make some effort to catch the blade before it falls on there, right? It's just a matter of principle at this point. But yeah. I had to step away for a little bit, but I sent you a DM. Oh, okay. Let me take a look. Hold on. You've seen... Oh, okay. They just released a tweet. 15 minutes ago. All right, wait, hold on. Let me switch over to the to a different screen while I pull up the tweet so that I can have a little bit of a look-see at what they're saying. All right. Can you guys read that? Oh, it's a little cut off. All right. I'll read out the tweet for you guys. So, this was posted 15 minutes ago, roughly. And the statement reads, "We want to recognize and thank our attendees for their feedback regarding our recently announced meet and greet policy. To answer these questions and concerns, we have updated the registration section of our FAQ page linked below." All right, I'll bring up the FAQ page. Hold on, give me a second. Let me switch. Okay, this is their new FAQ section, now updated to answer questions about the ID check. So, hold on. I can't take credit for this, by the way. This is definitely due to other people talking about it on Twitter, besides me. Hopefully, the Pippa fans among Offkai staff finally grew a brain. Hold on, let me see. Alright. Okay. Why are you checking IDs at meet and greets this year? We have enacted this policy out of concern for guest safety, alongside maintaining fair chances for all attendees by discouraging scalping. Holy shit, they actually said it! We apologize for any inconvenience caused by the late nature in which this policy has been implemented. Why? Again, I'm glad that they said it now, but again, like, surely someone on your team should be able to know that you should have said this with your original announcement, right? If you have any inquiries, privacy concerns, or would like to request a refund for your meet and greet ticket, please contact us at register@offkai.com. Alright, okay, so I guess, okay. For reference, I made these slides like this afternoon. So I guess I was in their heads before I started stream. How will the meet and greet ID check work? Registration staff will be stationed at the meet and greet area to verify your identity and meet and greet ticket. Only the same team that checks ID for badge pickup will be checking ID for meet and greets. So this is good because it basically clarifies that, as you know, they're going to restrict the pool of people who are going to have access to your personal information as much as possible, right? It's going to be the same people who would have known some of your information anyways. Now, that doesn't address the problem of Offkai having a reputation for volunteers having grudges against specific talents, but it is a step in the right direction. Please present your IDs alongside your meet and greet ticket to the registration staff. The ID check will occur outside the norm, and meet and greet staff within the room will not see your ID. What IDs are acceptable for verification? Any valid photo ID will be eligible. If you have any questions, please contact us at, their official website. Alright. I get that a lot of people, I get that some people are saying, like, too little, too late, etc, etc, etc. But I really do hope that they just, like, saw Pippa's tweet or something, and they decided that, yeah, okay, it's about time that we pulled the trigger on actually speaking up for ourselves. But yeah, no. I'll take it. If Pippa and Offkai can have each other's backs, it's a good ending for everyone involved. Yeah, I'm very much inclined to agree with that. I'm just glad they broke the streak of, like, not saying jack all and then finally said something. Although, hopefully, I mean, like, character development and everything. If they can go from not saying jack shit to saying something, but only after other people have already spoken up, surely that means that next year when Offkai happens, they will be able to finally master the art of proactive messaging. So they don't need to hide behind other people who advocate for the con. But again, baby steps, baby steps. Oh yeah, Rima just DM'd me as well. I don't know, Rima, are you in the stream? But yeah, in any case, yeah. Now Rima sent me the link around the same time that you sent me the link, Lum, so yeah. We are scrapping. There was no rest of the presentation. That was pretty much it, right? This was all I had for this specific section, because I'd only gone so far as to draft up like an example of an alternative of how they could have written the initial announcement. And a lot of the stuff that I have here in the in this version of the announcement as it could have looked, this was pretty much everything that they have in their FAQs anyways. So they definitely got the message. Here's just, I'm just crossing my fingers that they'll retain the message for next year as well. But in any case, yeah. Tinfoil hat take, someone in Offkai is watching here right now. I mean, that's possible. But again, this stream is not why they updated the FAQ. The FAQ was definitely updated because they saw what people were saying on Twitter. I'm hoping that, it's because they were paying attention to what specific people were saying on Twitter. But yeah, I don't think I had anything to do with this, like, at all. So I like to think that Armchair is the sleep paralysis demon of corpos. I think that's giving me too much credit. I don't have that much power. I'm like a sub 10k channel on YouTube. And I only look at disasters after they've already happened. But yeah. Offkai just needs to watch all of Armchair's streams. Nah, I can't. That's giving me too much credit. Offkai's, they don't need to listen to me to fix their problems. They just need to start opening their eyes and ears when it comes to what other people are saying about their con. Especially the people who've spoken up to defend their con. Because that's the thing that, you know, that's the thing that irritates me. As a fan. Speaking not as a kapipi, but as a fan. More like a noob swaying this in. That's an image. I tend to imagine that my role is more similar to a mate, where I'm the dog, right? My role is more similar to that of a mongrel, where the body may be cold and buried and the scent may be faint, but so long as there's just enough to tell me where to start digging, I will gladly do the majority of the digging. But yeah. But are you a kapipi? I don't know if I've earned that title, I'll be honest. I've watched Pippa without membering for so long that it feels weird to member to her, which probably sounds autistic as fuck, but that's genuinely how I feel about it. But... And I also don't interact with the other, like... The reason why I don't really identify with any of the talent's fan bases as much is because I don't really interact with the community that much. Like, I interact with specific people who are a part of them, but not the community as like a body of people. So I don't know if I would claim that title for myself. I don't know if I have earned that title, so to speak, for want of a better way of phrasing it. Scarlet Michael Laurie, thank you for being a footstool for 10 months. Nearly a full year, chairman. Nearly a full year. Holy shit. It is quite interesting. It's quite a walk down memory lane that gets triggered every single time I see somebody member again. It's getting close to that 1 year mark. Scarlet Michael Laurie, thank you for the 5 gifted memberships. We'll the 5 new footstools. Hope you enjoy those emotes. But yeah. You are Gilgamesh's favorite pronoun, yeah. Take the win, Shaman. Don't be like Pippa and schizo out at the woman that said nice shoes. Fair point, fair point. Sauna session saved me from an isekai truck hood attack. Holy shit. I don't know how that works, but I'm glad to hear that you're still alive. Holy shit. You underestimate yourself? I would much prefer that to overestimating myself. There's nothing more cringe than somebody who overestimates the degree to which they can influence the world around them. But yeah. Armchair junkyard dog expert. Yeah, kind of. That does kind of fit my role. Same. When did I get a gift membership? Probably sometime earlier on this stream. That doesn't mean you're not part of the community. Lots of us hover without being fully in the communities. Yeah, I mean, this is where the categorizations of different members of community kind of like works in my favor, right? Because again, just to remind you guys, basically you can locate like, you know, different community roles on like a table. So you have closeness. Okay, hold on. Let me use the type tool because that's just easier. You have, as a reminder, closeness to subject. Oh, sorry, closeness to creator. Then you have closeness to content niche. Oh, sorry. Closeness to community. And then you have... Okay, ignore how I did the axes backwards, because... yeah. Okay, so... You have, you know, in this category, this quadrant, people who are close to both the, you know, the creator and the community. You have insiders. These are usually when I think about, like, you know, people who are, like... who have the title of like being like part of the fan base or community, this is who I'm thinking about. You have like devotees, you have tourists who are not really attached to either, and you have what is it? Oh, fuck, I forgot the name. What is it? At least make the y-axis backwards too. No, that would be too much. That would be too far. That would be too far. What is it again? What was closest? Fuck. What was closest to community again? I think it was normies. No, not normies. Not normies. Oh, what was it? What was it? Fuck, I should remember this. I don't know, socialites or something, I don't know. Basically people who are there for like the community interaction, stuff like that. People who are there to form friendships with other people. They're all well, these three are all fans, right? But this is just a more specific way of like segregating fans into different categories based on what they're attached to and the degree of attachment. But yeah, no. Usually when I, you know, find a creator that I enjoy, I usually fall more in this category than this category or this category. And when I think about like, you know, Kapipis or like, I don't know, Butter Cookies or like Star Knights, I'm thinking about like people who belong in this category, not like this or this. And definitely not this. But yeah. Lurkers maybe? No, not really, because lurkers more describe your behavior in the way that you interact with things. Lurkers tend to be more in this category than here. Because the whole point of lurking is you don't really speak, you don't really interact with the other people. You remember what stream you did that on? Oh, there've been multiple, so I can't really. I think gatekeeping stream was the first time that I brought this up, but yeah. I'm a tourist, I'd rather play games than watching streams. Fair enough, fair enough. Guess I feel like a lot of people are devotees, but yeah, personally, I don't know. Again, when I think of a fan base, I tend to define it by the members that are the closest attached to both community and creator. That's why. What's the difference between insiders and devotees? Insiders are equally involved with / attached to both the creator and the community, whereas devotees are only attached to the creator and not so much to the community. A truck driver is not the safe type, and their truck is sometimes isn't maintained properly. Not that common, but if it were to happen, not strange. Oh, damn. Minglers! There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, minglers. There we go. Alright. Yes. Insiders, devotees, minglers, and tourists. Those are the ones, yeah. Kind of a socialite myself, enjoy talking to the other guys on Discord more than actually watching the VTubers. That's understandable. Again, to each their own, right? Everyone has a different way, slightly different way of enjoying their favorite content creator and their content. But yeah. No, when I'm a part of a fan base, usually I fall more in this category than this or this. Mingler does sound vaguely dirty. I mean, the thing is, I suppose that if you're going to talk about like the quote-unquote purity of an attachment, right? You could maybe make the argument that minglers tend to be less reliable than insiders or devotees because they're not as attached to the creator and more attached in other members of the community. But usually, the majority of minglers are still a net positive for the community that they're a part of, because of the fact that they are people who will go out of their way to form friendships among other people and bond over the current, you know, the shared interest or whatever. So, you know what sounds more dirty? Tourist. Now that we are agreed on. I think I did mention it briefly in the VCard stream, but I can't quite remember if I did. Again, a lot of these graphs, figures, and concepts are stuff that I've brought up multiple times over multiple streams, to the point where it's starting to get to the point where I can't really keep track of which specific one I mentioned them on. But yeah. you are right in that minglers do tend to also cause the most community drama out of these different categories as well. But yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's strengths and weaknesses, right? Tourists are unpredictable, minglers want to conform. Yeah, exactly. Back to the grind. Thanks for the Guerilla chairman. No problem, hero. Glad to have you around. Glad to have you around. Is there a plot for antis? Oh, hi, Agamata. I mean, antis would probably fall here, right? Antis are usually people who are like, you know... So generally the way that this works, right, is everyone starts off as a tourist. And then eventually they go into either this section or this section. And then from there, some people from either of these two sections end up becoming an insider. Antis are just people who, you know, they enter this quadrant, they never leave, and they never leave this quadrant in the sense of going deeper into a fan base, but they also refuse to leave this quadrant. So they just like kind of fester in this one area. This is where I would put antis, right? They construct a little prison for themselves and then they stay in this quadrant. Antis have their own separate graph. I have yet to encounter... Well, I mean, there are some, like, dedicated antis who, like, really, like, obsessively try to understand the minutia of their, you know, their least favorite content creator or their most hated content creator. But they're quite rare, right? They're a kind of, like, warped inversion of a devotee in that scenario. Like a demonic parody of this. They move further into the bottom right. It's hard, right? Because it depends. Because there are different types of... Oh, actually, the more I'm... Okay, initially I wasn't... I thought it was kind of like a joke, right? To say, oh, antis are a separate graph. But the more I'm thinking about it, yeah, maybe you're onto something with that one, Rue. Where... Maybe we could make a separate graph just for antis because of how there are differences in terms of the different genres of antis as well, right? Niji Sisters is a general term, yeah. Or it was when it was popular. And there wasn't a segment of the fan base that was trying to assert that it's some sort of slur or something, yeah. Discord and Niji Sisters used to be like the fan-based version of guy or dude, where yeah, technically it's gendered, but usually it's used in a way that's like applies to both. There are two quadrants with tourists overlapping both quadrants. Yeah. Antis literally do have a second quadrant. Yeah, I suppose. Antis that will actually send super chats to announce their hatred of VTubing. Yeah. Niji Sister is just a counterpart of Hollow Bro. Ah, okay, yeah. That makes sense. Antis should ride the line of caring and hating their content creator. So you say should, right? You say should, but pretty funny when people pop up to complain rather than making it as not interested. Yeah. I mean, look. Not everyone understands the philosophy of, you know, live and let live, right? Sometimes you get people that just don't understand the concept of not engaging with something you dislike. And the worst part is they don't even do so in a productive manner for themselves. Let's try making one? I mean, I guess we could, right? Alright, okay. Let's see. Let me switch back to the type tool. Alright, so let's say we do have, like, you know, antis, right? I suppose you have degree of... Okay, we can invert this. If we just do a simple inversion of this graph, you have degree of hatred directed at creator. And then you have degree of hatred... I suppose, actually, animosity towards community and animosity towards creators. Probably a more concise way of phrasing that. Animosity towards creator. So you start off with just your garden variety anti, right? Okay, hold on. Let me get rid of the squigglies. Let me also fix the the axes so that it doesn't look like I'm retarded. Hold on, give me a second. All right, there we go. It gets in certain parts. Yeah. He's a special one, that one. Alright, hold on. Let me see. Okay, so yeah, this would be the inversion, right? There we go. Okay. So you start off with your garden variety antis, right? But then when they focus more on just delivering animosity towards the creators, I guess they become like stalkers, right? Oh, actually, yeah, no, you become stalkers. You become stalkers because if you don't have any degree of animosity towards the other, the members of their community, just the creator themselves. So I suppose stalkers fits this category well. What happens if you don't have that much animosity towards the? Oh, I suppose. What would you call people who are like? They'll make a big show of like, oh, I don't actually hate the creator, but then they keep going on about how much they hate their fan base. What do you call that? What's a good name for that? Tourist? No. Okay, so when you say the stalker, okay, so when you say no, wouldn't a stalker normally like the target? The thing that defines a stalker isn't whether they like a target or whether they hate a target, but more so the degree of obsession towards them. And if you have an anti that is like incredibly obsessed with like following the creator's every like move, etc., then yeah, you'd probably go with stalker, right? Virtue signalers? I don't know if virtue signaler is the right word, right? Actually, it's a very common trope where people who are looking to replace like a fan base that already exists will try to say, oh, I love XYZ creator, I just hate their fan base. I wish their fan base would be like different, right? It's like I don't mind the creator, I just wish their fan base was entirely different and preferably replaced with exact copies of me, right? What do you call that? Because that's like a purifier is too noble in connotation. It's more like when you have something that gets infested with bacteria. I suppose inquisitors, actually, inquisitors I think works quite well. Inquisitors, right? Oh, actually, no, because I think inquisitors works better here, right? Because inquisitors are people who are moral busybodies, both when it comes to the fan base and the creator, right? So I think inquisitors belongs here. But I think displacers? Okay, you might be onto something with that one, Agamata. Displacers. I kind of like that. Displacers. Colonizers is also good. I think I like colonizer better than displacer. Sorry, Agamata. I have to go with colonizer. Alright, yeah, I think this works. Yeah. Okay. Alright. I like this graph. I think this graph works. It's drawn very poorly. I could probably do this better. But for the time being, for the sake of demonstrating that idea, I think this works. Yeah, so you start off with garden variety antis, right? I've realized that after people has a habit of saying antis instead of antis. I've started picking that up, even though I've tried to eliminate that from the way that I speak. But it's very American. It's a very American way of saying antis. But yeah, no, I agree, it's better. Alright, so yeah, you start off with garden variety antis, and then from there they either start amplifying their hatred of either the creator or their community. And then if they hate the creator more, they progress into becoming a stalker, I suppose. If they hate the community more, they progress towards being a colonizer. But eventually, when these antis learn to hate the other half of the creator experience, then they evolve into, or I should say they degenerate into being an inquisitor. But yeah. Do you also say Peller? No, that is a bit of brain damage that I refuse to adopt. Most people in America talk like Pippa. Fair enough. Fair point. Fair point. Fair point. Colonization is so bad that it's spelled with an S without a C. Fair enough. It's crazy that they exist in so much quantity that there needs to be specialization. Maybe. We've won a right to spell. Here we speak UK English. Although I have noticed a little bit of an interesting culture thing. Nowadays, when you use Windows and you select Australian for like Australian English, it defaults to US instead of UK, which is an interesting shift that I don't think has always been there since, well, I remember it being different when I was a young warthog, so yeah. Press B if you want to cancel your auntie's evolution. Man, I wish. But yeah. Okay, this went dark, kind of. A little bit. The UK is cucked. Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate adjective to describe the UK in current day. Speaking of cuckoldry, have you guys seen the way that Rent a Girlfriend ended? It's so funny. I've been watching people melt down about that on Twitter the entire day, or at least for half the day, and it's been hilarious to see. It's so funny watching people tune in to a story whose narrative is the equivalent of a wheel of cheese. It's just a fucking smelly circle. The entire thing. The plot literally went nowhere. You reset right to the beginning, and it's like no different to the way that it was. There's no progression whatsoever. The ending is a carbon copy of the almost a carbon copy of the circumstances where it started. The character arcs are a fucking flat line. It's so funny. Is it delicious? Well, I suppose that depends, right? That depends. You know, I've started to wonder, where does the appeal for something like, how do I say this without sounding insane? I've come to the conclusion that Netarare is a genre that is built for people who dislike women but aren't cut out to be misogynists, whereas yaoi, or no, I shouldn't say yaoi, specifically Riona is a genre cut out for people who dislike men but aren't cut out to be misandrists, I suppose. And TR appeal is a very generous term. But yeah, let's say appeal. Hold on, my monitor's freaking out again. Okay, I really need to do... Okay, so I've plugged it in awkwardly to the point where there will occasionally be... I'll move my desk slightly and then it'll disconnect and go black. I really need to fix the way that I plugged in this cable after stream, because otherwise I'm gonna need to constantly like prune it and preen it. But yeah. Oh no, not Riona. The other, what's the equivalent? Like toxic yaoi, I suppose. Toxic yaoi. That's what I was looking for. Riona was the wrong descriptor for what I was saying. Be careful, Chairman. The saga is in the... I mean, look. The reason why I say that is because cuckoldry is basically what happens when you enjoy seeing women get fucked, but you don't want the responsibility of doing the fucking, right? That's basically what it is. That's why I reached the conclusion that surely, right? You don't want any of the... You don't have... There's no love in that act. You know what I'm saying? There's no taking of responsibility for any of their pleasure or even any of the pain, if that's what you're into. It's just watching somebody else do it. Toxic yaoi is the best yaoi. Okay, yeah, cockledry is okay. Cockledry isn't NTR, right? It's slightly different, but like, yeah, you know. I think most of you get what I mean. I thought it was a humiliation kink. Yeah, maybe. Riona is Guru Light. Fair enough. As a certified degenerate, cuckoldry is not the same as NTR. Yeah. I stand correct. That was poor phrasing on my part. But yeah. I can't refute that. Smut yaoi is filled with that for some reason. Filled with what? Sorry? Goes on a spectrum. I suppose. NTR is a very bad term because it's actually 3 genres clumped into one umbrella. I think that's I mean, that describes my understanding of NTR quite well. Because my understanding of NTR is probably not as fleshed out as some others. But I get the vibe. Yeah, there we go. Hold on, give me a second. Something I hope that none of you ever have to go through is the tendency of blowing your nose too hard. Because I don't know if you've ever experienced how, like, what can happen if you blow your nose really hard. And because you're, like, holding a tissue over your nostrils, instead the pressure comes out the corner of your eye instead of out your nose. But in any case, apologies. That was probably very vivid information. Nasagi better come out of retirement to make a PowerPoint about NTR. That would certainly be a way of returning. Yeah, that hurts, yeah. What the fuck? Oh yeah, no. I mean, isn't that why boogers are salty? Because your eyes are directly connected to your nose. I've had that happen when I had a cold. Yeah, it sucks. It sucks. Sounds like... You know, actually, hold on. You've heard the myth about, the Korean folk myth about why people get runny noses, right? One of many, I suppose. Urka's had it worse. I'm on my period and oh yeah. Sure. Have you not heard it? Oh, okay. So according to This is what I heard, right? I don't know if I was being had by a bunch of Koreans or if this actually is like a real folk myth that Korean people have. But no chair, not again. It's for the benefit of the people who didn't hear it the first time I talked about it on stream. Once upon a time, there was a depressed young prince who had the misfortune of being born with a bifurcated penis. And because of his deformed member, he was never able to find a wife, and he died lonely and alone. But death wasn't the end for this lonely prince. As a ghost instead, he would now take to relieving himself and his bifurcated penis by inserting it into the nostrils of people. And when he arrives, that is when your nose runs. And that is, according to Korean people, why people get runny noses. Because a lonely ghost of a lonely prince has chosen to relieve himself and his bifurcated member in their nostrils. Now imagine that, but now with the knowledge that your eye and your nose are connected. That's a really cursed image. Yeah. What the hell am I listening to? Asian folklore. Yes, it's time to go to bed. Oh, yeah. We've reached that part of the stream. Sounds like a German bedtime stories are morbid, not degenerate. I feel like, I don't know. There are quite a lot of nuggets in the folklores of the Asian countries. Yeah. I wonder what sort of culture in Korea creates that. An excellent question, and sometimes when I speak to my Korean friends, I ask myself that as well. This is an improvement from the NTR and Friends talk. 3 hours late, did I miss anything? Not too much. Don't be too worried about that. And that's why boogers are yellow when they get hard. True. True, Shady. This, but... No, don't bring the this but blank curse over here. Not when I'm talking about that. You deserve to be executed for saying that, Rue. As a German, I can agree, our folktales are quite dark. That's true. Apparently, I don't know, I distinctly remember a few years ago, we have a radio station in Australia called KISS, K-I-I-S. And there was a segment, an interview segment that was hosted on it a few years ago, where they brought on a man that had a bifurcated penis. I distinctly remember that being a thing. I don't know if there's anybody else who ends up watching the VOD or is currently watching who's from Australia who remembers that happening on air and who can back me up on this, but I distinctly remember that was a thing a few years ago. Yeah. What? Yeah. German folktales are grim. I see what you did there. I'm curious. Game over. Did you get traumatized? I remember listening to it with a kind of detached semi-interest. Because, I mean, that was after I'd heard the Korean myth. So, at that point, I wasn't really shocked at the idea of a man with a bifurcated penis. Do both halves work? I mean, I assume so, right? I assume so? I can't imagine how you'd have sex when you have a bifurcated penis. Because I imagine it's bifurcated sideways, not like, vertically. Because vertically would be like... Man, that would be... that would be a struggle. But I mean, sideways is like awkward, no? Sure, that was what was semi? I'm not into that. Wasn't that turned out to be a hoax? It's really old? Maybe. I didn't keep up with the story though, so I never dug too deep into that. Man, this is what happens when you speak to people who actually do have an internal monologue and or the ability to visualize things in their head. It's very easy to turn yourself into a cognito hazard when you're speaking to someone with that ability. This is a 4 a.m. conversation. Well, I mean, we're not too far away from 4 a.m. where I am, so I mean, this about makes sense. I see, Spydock, I see. I don't recommend that for anybody else who's watching, by the way, though. Also, Chair, I'm supposed to have lunch in a bit. How dare you? I see, I see. I apologize, I apologize. The EU bros have to deal with this at 6 to 7. Look. I don't choose where our tangents go. We just go with the flow over here. It's always 4 AM somewhere. Yeah, there we go. That's the phrase. That's the cope I was looking for. I can visualize things in my head, but I don't have an inner monologue for some reason. I mean, just because you have one doesn't mean you have to have the other. You can have either. But yeah. Stream is going to be 2 hours. True. How long has it been? It's been like, what, 3 hours at this point? Bordering on 4? Fuck me. Alright. I probably need to end the stream. I probably need to end the stream soon, just so I can sleep and wake up early tomorrow to start grinding away at the finishing touches on the Brave stream. But, yeah. For all the people who tuned into this Guerilla, thank you for being willing to show up and listen to me yap on such short notice. Look forward to the stream that I'm going to be doing on Friday in EST time, Saturday if you're operating off of, Australian time, where I'm going to be doing a deep dive on Brave Group and how they've been operating for the last few years. There are a few perspective shifts that I'm hoping that the stream will help facilitate among some of you guys, but yeah. It's been a lot of rabbit holes, and I'm looking forward to being able to summarize and share some of the stuff that I've come across with you guys. So, yeah. All right. I will be... Okay, hold on. Let me switch over to the head horde screen before we find somebody to raid. I forgot. I actually forgot that the audio source was not properly linked on the... Oh, fuck, I just realized. Okay, thankfully you guys spoke up, because I would not have remembered to insert an audio input from one scene to another if it weren't for... Alright, let me just... Okay, now every single scene has an audio input. For fuck's sake. Alright. Apologies. But anyways, what I was yapping about just then was... Yeah, just Brave Group stream later on this week. Looking forward to being able to show off a bunch of stuff to you guys. And I'll be sending you guys off to Lumi, Lemon Woman, who's doing a karaoke at the moment. So, I think that should be a nice palate cleanser from what we talked about in today's stream. Thank you for tuning in again. Behave in Lumi's chat. I don't think I've rated her before, so make sure to blend in seamlessly with whatever's currently going on. And yeah, I'll see you guys on Friday/Saturday to talk more about Brave. Otsu chair. Otsu chair.